I was.
So-
So on the file.
I can't see it, but it's so. Yeah.
Honestly,
As soon as you walk in
Yeah,
that,
mine-
room, you'll see
Down in
in the
Brother's.
box on top of the file cabinet, right next to this monster. I apologize. Do you want,
That's more important, this will change and.
I can imagine, but I don't think it will.
yeah, I think from those like.
It's just simple operation.
Oh, that is nice, like a thought. Wow, they're really very. Wow. That was our chair was. Yeah, that is so nice. I thought of doing something little like that in my bag and then I only brought my face. I left my bag. Either you or my kids. Yeah, well, I had some things before, or apples, I sure apples. Were good. So she was good. She I think
It's first grade. Kids went to school.
it's kind of survival of the fittest, it was.
She would go.
Given us the old caucus days when they would bring in food to one caucus. You know, you're learning that you know bar when you see a box. They don't just do that unless it's going to get all.
That's off under his eyes and his neck. And then it floated. Progress to God. And it was minus 3 degrees. So I'm not sure. And sit down and it was better. I had done it last year. And I had probably
Oh, with Peter, his. So. You know, around with the, and it was good that it wasn't diabetic. He would study. Because he played all of it. And. A mild. Simpsons in his life. And,
before this.
I had that more the surgery. So they didn't give him a hard, they didn't even real soft, they even blocked his leg. They didn't even need, I mean, you could have cut the foot off of him, and he would not have felt it. And, you know, he came out of surgery, he was fine, he went home. Saturday. Went to the Saturday night, I wasn't hungry.
No, would you say identify with anybody or?
Oh, yes.
Some
Some might have started.
Oh, no, I'm trying to think that it's. Great. I see.
Yeah. I've got another one for some reason. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's a shock.
It looks like it's not that you saw the reason. I think that. Yeah.
The dogs. Saturday.
So we think that that's about. No,
You can never.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Because he didn't.
It's the last thing I had. Okay.
How do you navigate getting in and out of your office? That was a vague yesterday, you know, trying to go to
Oh,
one floor,
yeah.
then go to another. floor.
Well, I was just gonna say, it's not a problem for me, but I usually meet people on the first floor.
Well, later on in the day, I had to meet somebody at Shoemaker, and that's what I did. I said, meet me in the lobby, please. Take me up to your office because
It's not easy.
I don't want to have to go through trying to get through security again.
It's one. Very midnight. That is. The sun. I was privileged to file. But it was pretty. I was in. Much. Challenging. I know it when you're.
I'd like to call September 27th, 2023 meeting of the Ohio Elections Commission to order. Mr. If you call the roll.
Here, Mr. Knight.
Here.
Ms. Hagan,
Present.
Mr. Lyle.
Present.
Mr. Here, Vice Chair Tavares.
Here.
Chair Copeland.
Here.
All the members are present.
Thank you. At this time, the first item on the agenda is approval of the regular meeting minutes of September 14th, 2023. Those minutes have been distributed to everyone.
There were some corrections for what was originally sent out last week, but they have been made. Mr. Lyle has some comments, Mr. Knight had some comments. And so there are changes from last Thursday, relatively minor thing. One was a sentence structure change that Mr. Lyle suggested. And one thing Mr. Knight suggested was changing it to the start time to 10:20. It should have put in there 10:20 because nobody could find parking, but you know, I didn't do that. That's about it.
Move.
Motion on the floor has been duly seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign. Motion carries with a vote of 7-0.
I'd like to abstain.
It's used.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Mr. Stouffer.
Okay, so-
Abstaining because it was 5.
5-0.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The next item is our hearing, and I think we have all parties present at this time. So we can get started on that.
Did you still want, because Mr. Goldstein's here, separation of witnesses or?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Goldstein, you have to ask you, please. What do you think your schedule is for his appearance?
And I was subpoenaed at 10. I'm not trying to be disrespectful.
No,
I've got other things on my calendar, so that's what I'm trying to, I thought
Yeah.
I'd testify at 10.
Yeah, understood.
I'm gonna call myself first, then Megan Fitzmartin, and then Mr. Goldstein.
Approximately what time for his benefit? Not
Well,
the-
assuming I take 30 minutes, she takes 30 minutes, that would be about 11 o'clock.
Mr. Goldstein, if you would please, thank you.
May I see you close the door on the way out, please?
I will.
Thank you. At this time, I believe that we need to have Mr. Hicks sworn in, correct?
Correct.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and nothing but God?
I do.
Thank you.
So any preliminaries that you'd like to be sworn in?
No. You can probably just stay right there and statement.
Okay, so I'm calling myself as a witness. I think I'm not supposed to not have a bunch of stuff around me. These are only the questions I plan on addressing. So Mr. O'Brien wants to object to any of those as I go. But I thought it would be good to call me first and then allow me to be questions as well. And I will appreciate being able to sit as much as possible, since during the Ohio State game, not any celebratory thing, I dropped a piece of firewood on my foot while with a bunch of neighbors at our outdoor fireplace. So I'm recovering from that. So here's the key questions that I want to address that I think are relevant to me as a witness is first, who am I and why did I do this? Why do I bring these kind of cases? Why do I focus on these kind of things? So just by quick background, I'm Chris Hicks. Grew up in Cincinnati, spent my whole life in Cincinnati. I've been married for 33 years. I have one son who's watching the dog. That's another issue we have. I come up super early to drop the dog off at my son's house. He lives in Worthington. I have been for my whole life, I think repeatedly, and I'm focused on ethics, doing the right thing, and trying to clean up things that I think are broken. And campaign finance in Ohio, I think is broken. Unfortunately, we hear about it mostly only when the feds get involved. We never hear about it much on anything other than maybe if you're a local township trustee or your county commissioner, but anything on a statewide level or involving the legislature, we only hear about it when the feds get involved. And I think it's got to change. And so people ask me all the time, does somebody pay me to do this? Am I finance? Am I just, no. I describe myself as semi-retired and I have a sick hobby. My sick hobby is trying to improve our state and trying to improve the state of politics. So that's kind of a little background on me and why I bring these kind of cases. So how did this case come to be? So I'm going to actually refer to a couple exhibits that relate to how this case came to be. The first one is going to be complainant exhibit number 6. If you have a version of the page numbers on it, they say 5-3 at the bottom and page 33. Is that exhibit, and within it, so that's exhibit 6, and it says hearing documents, and then within it, it has exhibit 4, which is an invoice. And so, as part of the process related to the Alan Freeman campaign and the case involving Alan Freeman, this invoice surfaced that involved a variety of different candidates. Brian Stewart, who's another case, Lampton, Freeman, Schmidt, and Young. And so when I saw this invoice, I dug in, built my personal knowledge based on getting campaign filings, investigating what the candidates have filed, what invoices and so forth have been involved. And from that, in my view, I found that I thought that there was probable cause relating to Gene Schmidt and Brian Stewart, out of these candidates, that there had been expenses that took place that were in-kind contributions that had not been reported anyplace on a campaign finance report. And that's the genesis of this case. That's the genesis of why. So you'll notice that I never brought Lampton or Young because those, I could not find any probable cause that they had not reported something. These are the two, there were actually 3, Freeman, Stewart, and Schmidt. All these candidates were tied into Team Householder. That should be a blight on Ohio history as it comes to politics. I think my personal view is that is not unique. The amplitude of the amount of money involved was unique, and that's why it drew a lot of attention. And I brought this case, and I get involved in these kind of cases because I think that as long as we have a scenario in Ohio where nothing ever happens unless the feds do it, and people below the top couple guys, nothing ever happens to them who have benefited from these schemes and brackets, then we're never going to get better. And I don't think actually the funny part is I don't think it involves, it means let's go figure out every person who was a Team Householder candidate one by one. I really think that if in our state we started to show more vigor on these kind of things, it wouldn't take that many and the behaviors would change. It wouldn't take that money and the behaviors would change in terms of what happens. So that's the question of how this case came to be. Another aspect in terms of how this case came to be was the decision in the Freeman case, which in exhibits, the 5-4 exhibits, it actually says 5-3 at the bottom of the page if you have the version where I put page numbers. That is exhibit 11, and it's on page 63. Exhibit 11 on page 63. If any of you want, for anybody has laptops, I have all these exhibits in a bookmark PDF that makes it really easy to get the stuff. If anybody wants that, I can give it to you at a break or something. But this is exhibit 11, which is the decision and finding in the Alan Freeman case. Remember that Alan Freeman and Gene Schmidt were symbiotic
I
candidates.
will object at this time. Let me, please, Steve. I would object. That was a separate case. The commission heard, decided, the evidence was different. Whatever opinion was rendered in that case, I would object to Mr. Hicks reading that. In this hearing, I also noticed he had exhibits involving Freeman. We're here before the commission, as you all well know, from 2 prior hearings that we've had on a claim that Ms. Schmidt's campaign did not file complete and accurate report pre-primary in March of 20, post-primary in April or June of 2020. What happened and what Mr. Freeman did, I can't account for, Ms. Schmidt can't account for. And the decision of the commission in that case is absolutely, completely and totally irrelevant.
I don't think it is, because it relates to the same exact resources, particularly RJ Mancini and Steve Caraway, and the services that they were providing to both campaigns.
I'm just gonna sustain that. Go on.
Well, I'm still gonna then read it, because in that finding,
No, you can't. I mean, his objection has been sustained.
well, so in that finding, it was
Mr. Hicks, the motion or his objection has been sustained. You can't, it was to not enter that into the record.
can you give a legal basis for that being sustained? I believe it's, I believe by the rules of evidence, it's a
Because
piece
it's
of
on a
evidence.
different case and it's not pertinent to this matter, which is based on different evidence.
Okay, so my statement about it was, this is why I brought this case forward.
And that's fine.
One of the reasons is because in that finding, it found that the in-kind services of Caraway and Mancini had not been recorded on any campaign finance report. So that's all I wanted to bring up about it. So a lot of times these objections cause us to take longer than they would without. And I think that's a very relevant point as to why I brought the case.
And I would note that that finding was made 2 years after he brought the case. So the finding in that case certainly wasn't a
It
motive
wasn't made
for
for
him
him
to have
after I
filed.
brought that case, after that finding. So,
Move on. Okay, that's fine. There's no need to argue between the two of you at this point.
I mean, if we don't want to have evidence, you guys can just say, we don't care in Ohio about this stuff.
Move on.
Okay, so the other thing that caused me to get focused around these cases was that in the federal indictment relating to Larry Householder, and this will be very relevant to testimony and questions I'll be asking people going forward today. It was specifically called out in that indictment, which I have an exhibit, in the case that
I would
JPL
again
and
object to indictment in unrelated.
JPL and Associates, there were 2 entities, Constant Content, a media entity, JPL and Associates, another separate entity. JPL and Associates was providing staff to friendly candidates to Larry Householder who were being paid out of money from First Energy. That's part of the federal indictment. It was part of the federal case for which there's now been convictions. So later, I think we're going to hear stories about plus ups and all that kind of stuff. But in the actual federal case associated with this, it was determined that JPL and Associates was paying for field staff or candidates friendly to Householder, and they were being compensated from First Energy money.
Object and move to strike that entire publicly.
So again, at some point in this state, we can't put our heads in the sand and say, things got determined and adjudicated we'll say at the state, we can't hear any cases related to Householder as long as the federal stuff is going on. Once the federal stuff is adjudicated, then we'll say we can't let anything that was determined in the federal case cloud anything in the state. It's basically a recipe for no accountability. And if that's what we want in Ohio, that's what we'll continue to have. So I'm glad to provide this exhibit. that is one page out of that, because I don't want to print out like, out of the indictment talking about how JPL staff was compensated and paid. I think it's highly relevant to this case, and it's a key reason that I put so much passion on these
Your
cases.
basis for doing it is fine, but as it relates to the evidence in this case, the evidence is relating to what Ms. Schmidt did or didn't include in her campaign finance reports.
Okay,
Your comment and reason for doing it is fine, but I don't think that there's.
and I think that Mr. Schmidt is going to try to make some claim about plus ups again. That's why we're spending a lot of time on this plus up concept. When the federal case adjudicated that was not what was happening in terms of how resources were being paid and reported by JPL and Associates.
I would add, again, not to keep interrupting, object and move to strike the federal case adjudicated no such thing. That was an allegation in the indictment as part of a conspiracy allegation. That is not a finding by the judge, jury, or part of any judgment or sentence.
Thank you. Okay, move on.
Okay, and then why my focus on Caraway and Mancini in particular? So Caraway and Mancini only worked for two candidates. Both of them, we'll see while they testify here today, but both of them previously testified they only worked for two candidates, Gene Schmidt and Alan Freeman. Those are the only two candidates that they worked for. Mancini was paid for by the Ohio Republican Party I'm going to direct you to look at a particular exhibit. If you look in Exhibit 6, which is page in the documents, complaint in Exhibit 6, page 33, that says May 3rd at the bottom of the page. And then flip forward to Exhibit 1 within that. It's a campaign finance report that looks like this. The campaign, that exhibit within the complaint is payments that were made to R.J. Mancini relating to his campaign work. This is from the Secretary of State system. So if you see and you add up those numbers, it's all totaled about $7,000. Between the period, if you look at the dates, there's earliest one says 2/21, and then the last one says 3/20. These were actually, and we'll see it in the next thing I'm gonna point out, these were actually 2 weeks pay periods. The date is the end date of the 2-week pay period. So that one from 2/21 dates back 2 weeks prior to that for when he actually worked. Okay, so I wrote it down here somewhere, but so that's about February 8th. So February 8th through March 20th, R.J. Mancini was being paid for by the Ohio Republican Party, and he only worked on two candidates per his prior testimony, and we'll see what he testifies today. So that's about $7,000. The next exhibit in that set, Exhibit 2, is one of his pay stubs. This came through discovery from Mr. Mancini in the Freeman matter, and it's the only one of his pay stubs he provided that supports at least one of the line items in the ORP. So I brought this case because clearly he was compensated $7,000 across that time period as reported by the ORP, but no in-kind showed up anywhere for his services being provided to Ms. Schmidt's campaign. It's worth noting, neither did they show up in Alan Freeman in that prior case, which I talked about the decision adjudicating that. So that's another, that's a reason why the focus on Caraway and Mancini particularly in the affidavit, because those two only worked with Freeman and Schmidt. And they both testified to that previously, and we'll see what they testified today. Another question I'd ask myself is, why haven't I called Jeff Longstreth, Anna Lippincott, I tried to call Brian Katz, but why haven't I called some of these other actors within the Larry Householder operation? Because they're gone. So my understanding is Jeff Longstreth now in North Carolina and wouldn't be subject to any subpoena. This kind of stuff happened with Luke Householder, the speaker's son, in the Freeman case. When they're out of state, they're not subject to subpoena by this commission. So Jeff Longstreth's gone. I believe Anna Lippincott, last time somebody gave me an update, she lives in Europe somewhere. So some of the key people that are involved, as far as I know, are not within the state. So I have not called them. And then the last thing that I wanted to address myself is that last night, I'd have to look on my phone, but I think about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. Ms. Schmidt through Mr. O'Brien sent an exhibit talking about plus ups again. Spent a lot of time in prior testimony about this whole concept of, well, maybe these expenses were somehow in a plus up on some invoice. No actual evidence to support that, just this is the supposition that they were included in there and you should accept that. So I just want to address that. I've not had time because the exhibits that he provided and this plus up concept were only provided last night at about 3 o'clock. Only provided about last night at 3 o'clock. However, I have a lot of personal experience. My wife, 33 years as a professional artist and has been an agency artist for a long time. And if I had a chance to call witnesses on this, I could bring in expert after expert that says a 10% markup on media purchasing on rebills is industry standard. That's the norm. Is a 10% markup. That's not showing something else per se, but that's the normal thing that an agency does. They get a 10% markup for their profit margin on media purchases. That's standard. That is standard in the industry. I have, however, have trouble producing witnesses to talk to that point because I only received the exhibits making this claim, this new claim, last night at about 3 o'clock. So those are the key things that I wanted to address, to just talk about why I brought the case, how it got formulated, why the specific focus on Caraway and Mancini, why I think there is a nexus and a relationship between cases since the personnel were working for both campaigns together, why I haven't called some of the other principals, and this, what I think we're going to keep hearing, this idea that a plus up somehow accounts for these professional resources. And my personal experience with that, having been married to and hung out with all of the media buying friends of my wife for quite some time. So that's my testimony.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. Hicks, your complaint that you filed on June 16th of 2021 has a number of exhibits attached to it, correct?
Yes.
Do you have that with you?
I do.
Will you look at your exhibit number 4 that you had in June of 2021? And that's radio airtime, as you previously alluded to, for a number of candidates, including Ms. Schmidt, is it not?
I just pointed out. Yeah, I pointed out of the amended complaint, so an amended complaint that is the same exhibit number, but yeah. What exhibit number do you say it was from?
Exhibit number 4.
Yeah.
From strategic media to constant content for about 5 candidates.
Yeah.
And the airtime and radio production for Ms. Schmidt is listed on that document that you had in July of 21 as 23,560.03, correct?
Okay.
And 550 for radio production.
It is.
And that would be when added up, and you can add, I presume, correct?
Why don't you show me how to get them up?
No, I'm asking you if you can add, sir.
Yes, I can add.
Okay, and when you add those up, do they come up to a little over $24,000? I can
think
give
they
you.
come up to $24,060.03.
Okay, and the exhibit that you also had attached to those complaints that Ms. Schmidt reported, filed,
Yeah.
and paid was for $164,334.31, correct?
Which exhibit are you talking about?
The invoice from Constant Content to Ms. Schmidt dated
exhibit?
March 18th of 20.
What exhibit am I supposed to?
Well, I'll hand you the exhibit.
Also, your exhibit, so that's Respondents Exhibit 11.
Exhibit 11.
Respondents Exhibit 11.
Which duplicates one of your exhibits, which I can pick out somewhere.
Okay,
And what's the amount of the radio production and airtime on that document?
26/5/21/03.
Okay, so the invoice from Strategic Media that bought the media, correct, was for 24.
25.
And Mr. Longstreth, when he sent a bill to Ms. Schmidt, the bill is 10% higher, correct?
Correct.
And you had that document back in July when you filed this complaint, did you not?
Correct. Well, I don't know about that. I don't believe I did, no.
Do you admit here today that there is a 10% markup?
Hold on, you asked me a question,
Okay,
and
go
I
ahead.
don't want to go past, you answered my question for me,
Okay,
and I'll
go
go ahead and
ahead.
answer it myself. No, I did not have that invoice, because at the time I filed, so just to put, I filed my complaint on 6/8/21. Okay? He received the first Constant Content invoice on June 4th, 20. Okay, so I never had that invoice until I did like records requests, and that's why that wasn't in my, if you look at my actual complaints, that wasn't in the complaint.
When did you first see that invoice then?
I can't recall when I first saw it. The detailed invoice, it might have been from yours. We could look here, I can't remember, I don't know how much it matters, but
I guess it matters because you have known for some substantial period of time, more than 12 hours, that there was documents that reflected a bill for 24 grand that was marked up to 26 grand by Mr. Longstreth to Ms. Schmidt. Is that correct?
no, that's not correct. So you're making some supposition that I went through and did some sort of algebraic analysis on line items and invoice to figure out ratios between other invoices. First off, I didn't have this invoice. Second off, that would be a faulty assumption to assume that I did some analysis.
Wait, I think we just need to answer the question.
Correct.
You asked, do you have the invoice? When did you get the invoice?
That's correct.
So I don't think we need to comment suppositions or anything else. I guess if you're saying you didn't have it, then Mr. O'Brien, you need to take his word that he didn't have it. So let's move on from there.
But my point is, Chair, that he had it as late as May of this year for the May 4th hearing. Is that correct?
That would be, if that, yes. No, I don't know about that because exhibit 11, your May 4th exhibits were 1 through 8. You introduced 9 through 9 on was in the July 20th hearing.
So you have had it since July 20th of this year. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, I would have had it since July 20th. I potentially would have had it much sooner,
No,
other than
Yep.
Ms. Schmidt refused any discovery.
no, just yes or no.
Yes or no?
Yes, I had it. No, I didn't have it.
I think a witness is allowed to expand on their answer.
If it pertains to what the question is. So I think that if we're going to be accusatory or whatever, I think that is probably where the line will be drawn.
So if he is being
Right.
accusatory towards me that I somehow fraudulently didn't acknowledge some invoice, then I'm going to point out that he didn't respond to discovery much earlier when asked.
I think he just asked you when you had it. That's how I took it. Did the rest of the commission take it?
No, he asked me a lot more than that.
Okay.
He started quizzing me on math equations between invoices and other invoices.
No, he didn't. He asked if you.
Yes, he
could add
did.
it. He asked if you could add it. Let's move forward, please. Mr. O'Brien, are you satisfied with the answer? Or would you like to?
All I'm trying to establish, Mr. Hicks, is that you have had both Exhibit 4 that was attached to your complaint, the radio production costs and airtime for more than 2 years. You have had the
So this is an
exhibit.
editorial. What's the question?
No, but
I
that's,
have this editorial about me.
well,
Do you have a question?
I haven't got to the question. I'm saying the predicate of the question is you have had one document, the bill from SMP to Mr. Constant Content and Longstreth since June of 21. You admit you have had since at least July of this year, the invoice from Constant Content to Ms. Schmidt, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and my point is, you have had those documents that show different bills for the radio production and airtime, including a 10% markup since at least July of this year and not just last night.
I guess that's correct.
Thank you,
However,
thank you.
your supposition, I would have no knowledge of interrelationships between line items on invoices. And you're the one creating these suppositions that somehow I knew something or I did, which I would, by the way, for all the red herring of this, I would point out that this
Object
10%
and
markup
ask him
does
to.
not answer the question. The 10% markup has nothing to do with how field resources. It's the standard markup on media buys.
I move to strike the non-responsive answer.
I think it was a very responsive answer.
It's there, but move on.
Okay. So that I'm sure I understand and the record is clear, you have had the two radio production documents since at the latest on July 20th of this year, correct?
So I'd just like to make a point. I
No,
get
that-
criticized.
that-
You keep asking the same question over and over again.
Understood. Simple answer and then move on. And then.
I'm not gonna answer. I object to the question because I already answered the question.
Ask the answer.
Okay, it's asking the answers. So you could have looked at those two documents and concluded that there was a 10% markup, could you not?
No,
Why not?
because how would I know? The $164,000 invoice is a whole variety of things. That said no 10% markup between the number, whatever it was, 20. You would wanna, so the $24,060.03. I did not see any relationship between that number and $164,334.31. Your supposition that I somehow should have done algebraic equations to determine what the relationships were, and if there was some even percentage relationship, is faulty. Maybe I appreciate the respect you have for me that you think I did algebraic equations and to determine individual line items and analyze them, but no, I did not do that.
So you're.
Thank you. Thank you. That's my point. You did not do, when you had documents, any calculation to
I would have no
determine.
basis to do it.
Since July 20th, you have had the basis to do it, Mr. Hicks.
Is that a question?
Yes.
And since July 20th, you have had the basis to do it. That's a question.
You have had the basis to do those calculations. You tried to suggest that you just got the information last night.
No, because I never would have, until your exhibits last night that claimed that there was relationships between line items and other invoices that had never been provided. Okay, so that's the first time this relationship thing, I never would have figured that out on my own. I apologize for not being beautiful mind, mathematician maybe. I never would have figured this out. You're the one who's suddenly asserting, if you take certain line items out of certain invoices and look at certain other invoices, you can figure out that there's ratios between them. So no, I did not do that. I would not have done that. Had I had these other detailed invoices you provided, I would not have done that. Okay, so I would not have had the basis to figure I should go compute algebraic equations between line items of invoices.
Okay.
All of
Thank
it, though,
you.
I think is a red herring.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Hicks, you, having looked at the SOS reports, you know that Ms. Schmidt reported total of 164,000 shown on exhibit 11 as something pre and post primary that her campaign had incurred, and she paid 100,000. That document was also attached to your exhibit. Is that correct?
Well, I don't understand this part.
Again,
Reference
again,
Exhibit 11 and then some other exhibit. Can you just tell me the exhibits so I can flip them? I have all the exhibits.
you want to look at the exhibit that was attached to your complaint. There is a check for $100,000 dated April 2nd.
Can I request that you please sit down? Okay, and can I request that you specify the exhibits so that both I and all the commissioners can look at the exhibit you're referring to?
Yes, sir. If you would look at respondents exhibit number 6, it was also attached to your complaint that you filed in June of 21. Is that a check for $100,000 from the Schmidt campaign to Constant Content?
So the answer is yes. But yeah, I guess.
And that payment was reported to the Secretary of State, was it not?
Yeah,
And the balance due of 64,000 was also listed as a debt of the committee, was it not?
yes, but I'd also like to point out that you're leaving some things out.
Well, and
If
I
you
would
look at
object to him pointing things out. I asked,
Exhibit 7 in the same document, you're asking to look at one part of the same thing.
This is Mr. O'Brien's time, so you can come back with
Okay.
comments after he's done with his questions.
it is one of your documents, I might add. It's a campaign finance report data Schmidt for Ohio, 2020 post-primary.
What exhibit?
Are you familiar with an exhibit that shows the outstanding debt of 64,334?
That is exhibit 7 within that document. But since you're not referring to exhibits, so within. And I know it gets confusing looking at these. So within the amended complaint, exhibit 6. There are other exhibits, so it gets confusing. And exhibit 7 within the amended complaint. If you had the version that had the page numbers on it that I put on there, it would be page number 43, 44, 45. Page 46 of that is what you're referring to, I believe. And it shows the $164,000. And it shows that that was for media, airtime, and mailings. That is on page 46 of the documents I provided for complainants exhibit number 6. Within that, I apologize for the confusion, exhibit number 7, which is a summary of that.
And that document that you had attached to your complaint showed the payment of $100,000, the outstanding debt of 64,334, correct?
Where I see that is on page 46 of where I put numbers, but it is complainants exhibit number 6. Within that exhibit number 7, and it's I think the 3rd page of exhibit number 7. It's the 4th page of exhibit number 7, where it has the Secretary of State summary that was for media, airtime, and mailings. It was for $164,334.31. Of which $64,334.31 was outstanding, which was the net amount after the payment of $100,000.
Correct. And that is an exhibit that you have before this committee, correct?
Yes.
Ms. Schmidt reported in the 2020 post-primary 100,000 payment to Constant Content on the invoice and an outstanding debt of 64,000, correct?
Correct. And also that those were for media, airtime, and mailings, which is why I brought this case. Because I was looking for where were the resources reporting.
All right,
And
And Ms. Smith's.
so now it's Mr. O'Brien's time. You were able to make notes and bring these back to him. But he asked you a question, you answered it, now we're.
Well, he's creating insinuations that I want to be able to clarify
And
answer.
so we have the opportunity to do that if you do redirect.
correct. And at least Mr. Hicks on the next report did not, Ms. Schmidt, report the payment of that balance of the 64,334.31.
What exhibit are you?
I'm not referencing exhibit. I'm asking if you have any knowledge.
I know she paid it. I don't know if it was on the
Thank
next
you.
report.
Thank you.
You
My
asked a very
point-
specific question. Was it on the next report? So I don't know the answer to that without knowing an exhibit because I can't I can't remember everything.
Okay, to recap, if I can, Ms. Schmidt
Do you have a
reported.
question or are you recapping?
No, I'm asking a question
Okay.
because the prior questions, I'm unclear on your answers. Ms. Schmidt, to your knowledge, reported a payment of 100,000, a debt of 64,000, the subsequent payment of the 64,000, and all that was done in the in the post-primary reports in 2020, correct?
I say that again, ask the question again.
Did Ms.
There was a
Schmidt?
long speech before the question.
Did Ms. Schmidt report the $164,000 invoice shown on Respondent's Exhibit number 11 and to the Secretary of State in her campaign finance filings?
You've already asked that question, but yes.
Okay, thank you. And regarding Mr. Goldstein, who's here to testify himself, did Ms. Schmidt report that invoice that she didn't receive until August of 21 as an outstanding debt?
No,
She did not report that?
no, she received an invoice for $39,000 from a corporation, but only showed a little over $20,000 as a debt. So she did not report the invoice as a debt. She reported a different amount than the invoice as a debt.
Well, Mr. Goldstein, I think, can explain that how it went from 39,000 to 20,000, but she reported the $20,000 negotiated payment on that $39,000 debt, correct?
Yeah, she reported 20,000, whatever it was, 20,260, I think was.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. And you're aware from your conversations with Mr. Goldstein that that invoice for those services was not received until August of 21? Is that correct?
Say that again. No, I'm not aware of that.
Mr. Goldstein's letter and invoice of $39,000 was sent when?
The invoice from Constant Content was dated 11/4/2020. I'm saying it's in the same format as Constant Content invoices that are sent through QuickBooks to the candidates. So Mr. Goldstein's involvement was far after that, but the invoice itself was from 11/4/2020, just like the invoice from 3/18/2020.
And the
It's
invoice was dated
it's-
11/4/20. It was received and sent by Mr. Schmidt, or by Mr. Goldstein to the Schmidt campaign in the summer of 21, sir. Is that correct?
All I know is there's an invoice dated 11/4/2020 to the Schmidt campaign. I believe the Schmidt campaign is maintaining that they did not receive that invoice until they never knew of that invoice until Mr. Goldstein provided it to them.
I think that's correct. So you have no knowledge that it was sent in November of 20, other than the date of the invoice from Mr. Goldstein, correct?
How would I have, I wouldn't have any knowledge of what mail or what email Constant Content sent. I can't just comment on the date on itself,
Right.
11/4/2020.
And it relates to March of 2020, correct?
I'd have to look at it, but it relates to primary expenses.
And it's dated November 4th, and according to Mr. Goldstein, it is forwarded to Ms. Schmidt's campaign in August of 21. Is that correct?
According to Mr. Schmidt, I haven't heard testimony from David Goldstein, from Mr. Goldstein. So there was an exhibit, one of your exhibits, actually. Which was,
Yes. Exhibit 9 for the respondent as a letter dated from Mr. Goldstein. Is that correct? Certified mail. August 6th of 2021. Is that correct?
Which exhibit? 7 or exhibit, what number exhibit?
It's exhibit 9, Mr. Hicks.
So exhibit 9, the letter is undated, I believe.
It's a certified letter that's part of that exhibit, received
We
August
agreed,
6th.
we agreed that it said, we thought that the letter said August 3rd, 2021, and it was received on August 6th, 2021. So I agree with all that.
And included, an invoice dated November 20th or November 4th, correct?
Correct.
And was negotiated and paid in approximately the amount of $20,000 in January of 22 and reported, correct?
What happened was it appeared that 1, 2, 3, 4 line items were not paid for and one line item was paid for. I did do the analysis that the amount of the invoice, that the amount of what was shown as a debt was the second line item of that invoice only.
And $20,000 of that $39,000 was a negotiated payment, correct?
Yes, but I think I've answered what I can answer is I know that the 20,260 reflected one line item on that invoice.
And that was reported with the Secretary of State's report in January of 22, correct?
Yeah, and per exhibit 7, that's the only evidence that that makes an assertion as to that they never received the invoice in 11/4/2020, which is a note from Mr. Schmidt, which is your respondent's exhibit 7.
That wasn't my question. My question was it reported in January of 2020?
Yeah, but that note, that exhibit 7 is where Mr. Schmidt describes when the things were reported. That's why I'm pointing to that note, Ron.
Let me ask the questions and.
I
you
don't
give
know
the
when he
answers.
filed amended reports because the Secretary of State system doesn't show that. But in his note, that's exhibit 7, he refers to filing amended reports.
That's correct. I'm trying to establish.
I amended our 2020 post general, 2020 annual and 2021 semi-annual to reflect the debt. That was on January 31st, 2022. That's the only direct evidence I have of what he did, not from Mr. Goldstein or anybody.
Well, you have it from the Secretary of State's website, don't you? That
No, because the Secretary of State's website doesn't update the dates when amended reports are filed. It keeps the original filing dates on the Secretary of State's website. I would say it's a design flaw. So if somebody files an amended report, you can't tell from the Secretary of State's website that that report was amended.
and I filed the amended report in January of 22, correct? January 28th.
I would only know that he did it in 2022 because of Mr. Schmidt's note to Mr. Katz. Secretary of State system does not show amendments or when the date of amendments. So I assume, by the way, if you're asking me, I assume those are valid. I'm assuming that what Peter Schmidt said in this note was valid as to when he did the amendments. I'm not quite sure what the depth of the questioning is about.
I guess what I'm going to do, and if I can approach the witness to show him the exhibit, or if you have the exhibit, the Ohio Secretary of State Campaign Finance Disclosure, part of exhibit 7,
Your exhibit 7 and my
my
exhibit.
exhibit 7. Respondent's
Well,
exhibit.
your exhibit 7 is the note to Mr. Katz. This is your exhibit 7.
Exhibit 7 is multiple pages, sir.
So like the third, fourth page. Okay, wait, ask the question again. What's correct? Yeah.
Yes, the document that I'm trying to identify is exhibit 7, page 4,
Okay,
campaign finance disclosure, an outstanding debt listed David Goldstein, filed with the semi-annual July report in 21,
yes, what's your,
and it's 20,260, correct?
where, I see the, am I looking at this page? I say, okay, it's the outstanding debts page. So it's like, I was looking at the loans and debts search results.
So the Schmidt campaign did report an outstanding debt to David Goldstein, who had written the letter on behalf of Constant Content.
So that page is here, and I think it's important commission members look at it. That the debt, the campaign showed the date the debt was incurred is 11/4/2020. That's their filing,
Correct.
not August 6, 2021.
Date incurred is a date on the invoice, I believe, Mr. Hicks, correct?
Well, what's the date on the invoice, the $20,000 modified invoice?
The date of the original $39,000 invoice was,
Yeah, but that's not reporting the original $39,000 invoice. That's reporting the $20,000 invoice after it was modified.
I think my question was, is the date of the invoice received by the Schmidt campaign was November 4th for March 20 services, correct?
That, the invoice that's reported in that debt. There was a second invoice, right? So the $39,000 invoice was not reported. That a $20,260 invoice was reported, and I'm just want to look to see when that, the date, it couldn't be 11/4, but I want to see what the date on that was.
Who to strike the answer, I merely asked was the date of the invoice sent to the Schmidt campaign November 4th of 20.
Understood, move on.
So that's a yes, the invoice was sent
Thank you. Thank you.
on 11/4/2020.
And the payment that was negotiated for that invoice was reported on the Secretary of State form filed by the committee and listed as $20,260, correct?
I think you've asked and I've answered that multiple times.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned about Mr. Mancini being paid by the Ohio Republican Party for works on campaigns. Did the Ohio Republican Party report that to Ms. Schmidt's campaign committee as an in-kind contribution?
No, they reported it to the HRCC.
Correct. So the answer would be no, they didn't report it to the Schmidt campaign committee. Did HRCC report to Ms. Schmidt in her campaign committee an in-kind contribution by the employment of Mr. Mancini?
I don't know the answer to that question. They should have.
Did you check the Secretary of State's website to see if it had been reported as an in-kind contribution
To Mr. Schmidt's campaign?
to HRCC?
I don't know that I'd have to get, I probably did, but I can't remember. That's a pretty nuanced point. But I could go look and see what it did show up, because I don't know if it would show up in those payment reports.
Oh, Mr. Mancini's efforts that he was paid by ORP ever in-kinded beyond the report to HRCC by ORP?
I think it would be, first off, it would be the obligation of it would be a obligation of the HRCC to then in-kind it on. But secondly, Ms. Schmidt, to your point of I've had years, Ms. Schmidt has had years. Now to go ask Arvira Mancini, how much time did you spend on my campaign so that I can make sure to properly show an in-kind contribution? I think one of the reasons she doesn't want to do that is because she was not.
Object and ask the chair to direct the witness to answer the question. Not.
That's going beyond the nature of the question.
Did you had an exhibit at a hearing, Mr. Schmidt, from Anna Lippincott to Sue Jones and back about in-kind contributions by HRCC? I'm asking you generically, without digging into 400 exhibits that we have here on the table, whether you're familiar with an email from Anna Lippincott to Susan Jones, who you called as a witness in the Freeman case. Are you familiar with that email that deals with in-kind contributions for candidates?
First off, I think we have about 40 2 exhibits total out of 400, so,
Yeah,
but.
it seems like
I'd have to
400.
look at it, I don't have a recollection.
You don't have a recollection of the
I
exhibit?
know there was some email, but the context of it or what, and I didn't think it was Anna Lippincott or Susan Jones. I thought it was something, I thought it was a person that worked for Rob Secor.
There was,
But I'd be glad to find it so we can be clear and nobody's confused as
Yes,
to
why
what
don't you,
email you're talking about, because I don't recall one involving Anna Lippincott. No one involving somebody that worked for Rob Secor, so my recollection.
I think it's.
It was,
Well, take
there
a
was
second.
something that was my, plaintiff exhibit M. At least in my reference, that's the one that was the email, and I don't recall who, was, but that's the email that would be what you're talking.
Well, I'll see if I can find the exhibit here. To your knowledge, generically, did Anna Lippincott and Susan Jones have communications about in-kind contributions?
So I can look, my knowledge can be specific because I can look at the exhibit. So, yeah, I see these notes, but then they go to these notes that are Tom Danes. The stuff behind there's these Tom Danes. That's the person that worked for Rob Secor, Tom Danes. And so I see exhibit M is a discussion of in-kind. Specifically around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 candidates who have the unique distinction that they were all ORP endorsed, and therefore the ORP would have sanctioned people working on their campaigns. Alan Freeman and Gene Schmidt were not ORP endorsed.
So the answer to my question is yes, Anna Lippincott did ask Sue Jones, and they consulted ORP who should be in-kinded for the staff and other functions that ORP perform for those candidates.
Well, the list is greater.
The list is, yes, the answer is yes or no. Was there an email that?
The list is a specific set of candidates that were ORP endorsed, which neither Freeman or Schmidt. But both Caraway and Mancini worked specifically for Freeman and Schmidt. They didn't work for any of these candidates.
Move to strike the answer.
Re-ask the question and let's get the.
Do you have an exhibit that you're looking at that is an email from Susan Jones to Anna Lippincott asking about in-kind contributions, dated February 28th of 2020?
So I think that the notes are in order here. So I have the February 28th, 2020 at 9:14 a.m. with the list of candidates. And then below that is the Susan Jones asking about ORP in-kind receipts.
Susan Jones asked Anna Lippincott in that email, I don't want to prepare some report yet if I need to wait on in-kind information. Thank you. Correct?
Yes.
And Anna Lippincott answered listing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people that should be in-kinded. Correct?
It says the ORP list will be. So remember
And
neither Freeman or Schmidt were on any ORP list.
I mean, it's a yes or no answer to his question. You may not like the answer you have to give, but that's the answer.
I like the answer I have to give, and I think having been in many things like this unique, I have to answer only yes or no and can't expand on an answer or clarify an answer. I'm asked to respond to basically sound bites out of emails without being able to have any sort of
You
response
get the
on that.
opportunity on redirect.
I think you get the opportunity as a witness, Phil, to be able to expand on your answer normally.
Sometimes, but not necessarily.
Not
on
now,
cross.
right? Not now.
No, not on cross.
Not Chris
It's
Fix.
not on cross. No, Mr. Hicks, you have the opportunity to redirect, but on
Okay.
cross, you answer the question.
is Gene Schmidt listed on the
No, I've
email?
answered that. I've read off the list. No.
So JPL, ORP do not list Gene Schmidt as an in-kind recipient of aid by ORP. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say yes, that's correct, based on this note alone.
And if ORP is not notifying Ms. Schmidt of Mr. Mancini's work, and if JPL is not listing her as a recipient, how is she to know to file a pre-primary or a post-primary report that Mr. Mancini was paid by ORP to do whatever he did for the campaign?
Because she was aware of these people, working with them, and talked to Stephen Caraway, she, by her own testimony, almost every day. So she knew these people were compensated and knew they were working with her campaign.
And you have worked on campaigns, have you not, Mr. Hicks?
I've never done anything other than minimalistic volunteer work. My wife does more stuff because she does artwork sometimes for people.
And that's my point. You weren't paid. You were a volunteer, correct?
Yes, I've never been paid to work on well, I have been paid to work on a Senate campaign, a federal campaign, but I've not been paid to work on any state campaign.
And many people volunteer on state campaigns, don't they?
Yeah,
And some people are paid, correct?
some people, well, when they volunteer and they're paid, that's supposed to be reported as an in-kind contribution.
Correct, by the candidate committee who is notified of the in-kind contribution.
No, they don't necessarily need to be notified. They have an obligation to investigate and find that out.
But have you gone to any events in Claremont County that were door-to-door events?
Door-to-door events.
Yes, where they were going to pass out literature to homes.
Like where people meet up in a parking lot?
Correct.
No, I've never done that.
Have you ever observed it?
No.
Have you ever gone to these community meetings that you reference?
I think that I did have one time met with a group of people in a parking lot that were gonna go put up signs relating to a school levy,
How many people were there?
probably about 8 to 10.
And how many of them were being paid and how many were volunteers?
None of them were being paid
How do you know that?
because I knew the people. I had personal knowledge of the individuals. And none of them were being paid.
And a candidate who has a door-to-door that meets in a parking lot that has 20 people, how are they to know who's being paid and who's not being paid?
Well, first, because they're told that somebody is their campaign manager. Second, because the person themselves told them they're being paid. So the example that I gave, if I'm allowed to expand on the answer, because I just thought of this as a tie-in. So my wife, that campaign where we met in the parking lot for the school levy, my wife did all the artwork for that. And I got then, not investigated, but asked questions by the Board of Elections because the treasurer was told that my wife should have been reported as an in-kind and that the committee should go back and figure out how she was an in-kind because she was a professional artist. The assumption being that she was doing this while on work time, which people who have been involved in politics know that if you have an employee on work time do stuff for a candidate, that is supposed to be reported as an in-kind. First off, my wife has not been employed by a person. She works freelance. So she's not been employed by an agency for years and years. Okay. So first off, it's a complete non sequitur because she only gets paid for work she does freelance. She's not on anybody's payroll. But still, originally the treasurer was told that you probably need to go figure out what right in kind to show for the artwork because doesn't she a professional artist and she works, but it's like, no, she doesn't work for a firm. She did this on her own time and she has no standard hours because she's just a freelance artist. So then nothing needed to be reported. But that was actually something brought up as to that the obligation was on the committee and the candidate. Obviously, if I go back in time to when my wife did work for an agency, which I'd have to go back 20 years, when she worked for an agency, that agency would not have known the rules about reporting in kind. The candidate would have had to, or the committee would have had to contact them and tell them, we need to show something. But hopefully that helps to clarify a little bit. on this concept of.
I wasn't concerned with your wife's in-kind contribution. I'm concerned with Mr. Mancini.
Wasn't an in-kind contribution.
And at least you said Mr. Mancini was paid $7,000 by ORP in February and March of 2020, correct?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Mr. Mancini was paid about $7,000 in the spring pre-primary.
Yes.
How much of that was devoted to Ms. Schmidt's campaign?
I don't know the answer to that question. I know Mr. Mancini's prior testimony that the vast majority of his time was spent on the Freeman campaign.
And in his prior testimony, did he say he recollected going door to door for Ms. Schmidt twice?
So when I've tried to refer to and introduce prior testimony in the Freeman matter, I've been told I'm not allowed to do that. So now you're wanting me to respond to prior testimony that's not in evidence here.
I'll withdraw the question, Mr. Hicks. You don't know how much time Mr. Mancini devoted to the Schmidt campaign, do you?
I think I've already answered that question.
Okay. And are you aware if Mr. Mancini notified the Schmidt campaign that an in-kind contribution needed to be reported for his efforts?
No, I'm not aware one way or the other.
And I think we already established neither ORP gave notice of the in-kind, nor did JPL, correct?
Well, JPL would have nothing to do with Mr. Mancini's time. Do you mean HRCC?
HRCC or JPL.
As far as I know, based on the evidence we have and the emails we have, no, that never happens. My
And
supposition that it should have happened.
And at least I believe you included or affidavit from both Mr. Seaclower and Mr. Mancini. That Mr. Mancini was not directed by ORP to work on the Schmidt campaign.
Which exhibit?
It's Exhibit 12 I sent to you yesterday. It's a previous exhibit, but for
From
ease.
the Freeman matter? Yeah, he's already been questioned on this because the ORP did not provide any of the supervision of these people. They would have no basis to, so it's technically an accurate affidavit. But the ORP did not provide any of the oversight or management of these people. That was done through JPL. They just gave the people to HRCC.
You mentioned Stephen Caraway previously. He was working on quite a number of campaigns in that primary, was he not?
No, he was working on two. His testimony was, in his previous testimony, we'll see what he says today. But his previous testimony is he worked with Alan Freeman and Gene Schmidt.
I recollect the previous testimony that we're not going to talk about. He said he had those candidates who were in the southern half of Ohio, which were many.
Why don't we address this when Mr. Caraway testifies?
I think that's a good idea. I don't think I have any other questions that I think I'll get an answer on from Mr. Hicks, so I have no other questions.
Mr. Hicks. Yeah, I'll try to be super brief because I think the key thing is that I'm in that exhibits, complainants exhibit 6, the exhibit 7 within there. Again, there were I think 5 candidates on the invoice that originally started the process of this case. 2 of them, I could not find any probable cause that they had not reported things. This one, this $164,000 was specifically reported by the campaign as being media, airtime, and mailings, not field personnel and staffing. So there's lots of other things about that line of questioning that I get hit on relating to this, but the reality is that I don't think there'll be anything that shows that those resources were rebuilt or specifically to any of this stuff. It's all relies on the belief that actual past campaign finance reporting of what things were for was not accurate. That it wasn't actually for media airtime and mailings, be it with a 10% profit margin markup for the media company, for the media provider, content or not, but that somehow it was for field staffing. So I guess I don't really have anything else to say because I want to just move on. I appreciate that Mr. Goldstein's out in the hallway.
I have no other questions.
Do you want to ask questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Questions. So do we have, and we're going to hear from Mr. Caraway, but for Mr. Mancini, we have pay stubs, we have invoices, but do we have any sort of a timesheet that shows that, I mean, you've testified, and I don't have it all memorized, but Mr. Mancini only worked with 2 campaigns. On the other hand, I don't want to put word in people's mouth. Schmidt campaign doesn't have belief that there was anything more involved than volunteering. Is there any timesheet or documentation that we have that shows Mr. Mancini providing invoiceable hours to be paid via what he got paid for that relates to the work that he did for HRCC or any other organizations?
Is that a question to me or to?
It's to you, I mean.
Well, I guess it's
primarily
to
to
you.
you.
He's the witness.
Yeah, the question is, the answer is, I don't know. I've never seen any timesheets. There is, and we'll see what we hear today, his prior testimony of of his time spent. There is an exhibit within Exhibit 6, which was the original complaint. So Exhibit 3, which is on page 39, if you have the one that has page numbers on it. There's some emails that point to work taking place. So for example, RJ Mancini being added to administer Gene Schmidt's Facebook page. And then RJ Mancini and Luke Householder being directed to go to a meeting in Miami Township and get lots of pictures of Gene Schmidt.
Yeah, I remember those.
I actually believe I met, I'll ask him to make sure my memory's not getting weak over the years. I believe I actually met Mr. Mancini and Mr. Luke Householder at a campaign event that was with Gene Schmidt at it, which was a candidate forum that took place at a movie theater. But I think that's where Mr. Caraway introduced me to those 2 people. It was at a Gene Schmidt, it wasn't a Gene Schmidt event, it was a candidate forum, but it was not the district in which I don't believe Alan Freeman was part of it, because where I live, it's a different district. I'm sorry, yeah, Alan Freeman's like the western part of Claremont County and the big populated townships along the interstate. And then Freeman was running for the one that the rest of the county. And he wasn't part of the forum because it was a forum for the district that she's in.
But it's a question, so I
Yeah.
apologize for the statement. But we don't have a link that says post this. Work was done, actually completed. I mean, just because it was here doesn't mean it was done. It was kind of, you should go, please do this. So know that it was done. And then a invoice of some sort from Mr. Mancini to these groups asking for payment. And that then would relate to the, I mean, we're trying to determine like we've got an exhibit that shows he was paid, but I'm looking for a link that shows work done, invoiced, and then connects the paycheck. See what I'm saying? Does that make
Well,
sense?
I think here the standard that we're talking about here is a preponderance of the evidence, which means that it's more likely than not that RJ Mancini was providing services to our campaign. I think the emails, remember, these emails weren't voluntarily provided per se. These were out of discovery requests that were often fought, but also his own prior testimony, which we'll see what he testifies today. And I just want to point out whether somebody says, I remember the last time we were here, there was a case that you guys heard where the person said, and I wasn't paying total attention, but
Object that this is non-responsive.
well, it was just a little thing. The point is, if there was compensated activity that took place, whether it was, you know, all $7,000 down to $20. That is to be reported as an in-kind contribution. And the
But if it's a volunteer, then it's not, right? I mean, so, and is Mr. Mancini here today or?
Yes.
he's called. yeah.
Okay, well, then we can.
Yeah.
Learn more of that. Thank you.
Can I make one quick addition to the emails, just as a side note? RJ Mancini, if you look at those emails also, was constantly being emailed by Tommy Rolfe. Tommy Rolfe, and if you look at the email list, those were only the people that were the compensated employee people that were working on the campaigns for JPL and Associates.
Okay, so next, you're going to call
Yeah.
Let's get Mr. Goldstein.
Did you call Mr. Goldstein?
that.
Do I get a say or? do-
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll call Mr. Goldstein because he's been waiting.
Yeah, no, personally. You know, I'm not trying to direct your case, it's just more, like I said, out of respect for you. Sure.
Is he gonna sit here? Where's he?
Yes.
In there, or you want me to move it back more in the middle?
Jumped in front of her. Thank you. The court reporter statement.
Is her from tell truth, and the truth and nothing but the truth of God.
I did.
Thank you.
Thank you for waiting, sorry. we're late. So, Mr. Goldstein, can you describe just a little bit your background and your association with Constant Content?
Sure. My name is David Goldstein. I'm a licensed practicing attorney here in the state of Ohio. I primarily practice in civil litigation. Constant Content by Jeff Longstress contacted me, I don't know when, maybe a year, 2 years ago, and asked me to represent the company in regard to collections of monies that were owed by certain political candidates or current political individuals.
And, so you sent just a couple more background questions, but I'm gonna try to go quick. Can you tighten in a little bit? You said a couple of years ago or a year ago, when exactly you were retained by Constant Content?
I don't know. I know pursuant to the subpoena, I provided you with some letters that I sent out to several of the candidates. So probably the date of those letters, sometime probably in the 6-month time frame of those letters being sent out.
Okay, your letter to, was that certified to the Schmidt campaign on 8/6/2021 for the exhibits? So how, if that, we narrow it down to that, how far in advance of that do you think you were engaged?
Probably sometime, maybe three months or 6 months within that time frame.
Okay. Did those invoices, what were they, generally speaking, what were you collecting for?
Sure, and just for the record, to be clear, I did speak with my Constant Content through Jeff Longstreth, and he did allow me to testify about certain things, but obviously I'm not going to reveal any
Okay.
attorney-client privilege. But basically, what it was is that I was advised that Constant Content would provide certain services to political candidates, including the Republican Party, and they would send mailers out, was my understanding, like cards that they would send out, and they would also pay for that postage. And pursuant to the agreements that Constant Content had with these candidates for the Republican Party, they then would reimburse the Constant Content for providing the services.
And why do you, again, if you've question you want to do, why do you think the high number of those candidates and political committees hadn't paid?
That I have no idea.
Okay, Are you aware of the Larry Householder indictment?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Okay. And at that time, constant content to many, in the eyes of many people, sort of ceased to exist at that point in time?
That I do not know. I guess the only thing that I can state, it's not anything that my client told me, but I knew about obviously First Energy and what was going on. And obviously Mr. Longstreth, who owned or was one of the owners of Constant Content, was also named in that indictment, but I have no idea why Constant Content was not paid, other than when I did send the letters out, I did receive certain communication from some of the people I sent the collection letters out to, and they responded that they did not feel that they owed the monies, or that they needed additional information to prove that those services were provided and the amounts owed were in fact accurate.
And how did you respond when somebody asked for additional information on the invoices?
I tried to get them the additional information. There's postage information. I tried to contact the US Post Office to try and show that the postage was in fact paid for. I tried to contact some of my colleagues who have dealt with certain issues regarding postage to try and find out, to gather evidence to support the debt was owed. And unfortunately, I could not gather a lot of the information needed.
Okay. Did you feel that your collection efforts were specific to postage, mailers, and drops of mailers?
That was the only thing that was my understanding, was because just of the, again, the postcards that would go out regarding the political candidate and then the paying for the postage.
Okay. So you provided, by the way, were you ever contacted by the FBI or anybody like that associated with Constant Content or Constant Content Buildings?
Not, no.
Okay. You provided some exhibits. I don't know if you heard this, I dropped a piece of wood on my, for a fireplace on my foot during the Ohio State games and falling, if I fall down.
I'm sure right when you're about to score.
No, it actually wasn't, but thank God it was a small piece of firewood. So that's just an exhibit, and I'll point to where to look at. So just, I'm gonna walk through what has been provided, I think mostly all by you, and one of them would be, if you look at those little tabs, there's like little pasted on tabs. One says 723, if you go there and open it up, that's exhibit A.
Okay, I know.
You're probably familiar with this. And this is your invoice to your attempt to collect the debt from Ms. Schmidt. You recognize those documents?
Yeah, that, well, let me go, are you asking all the exhibits A through the last exhibit?
A through C, I think is, or there's several of them, if you want to comment. So for the commission, it's complainant exhibits A, starts with A. But there are several of them that relate to Mr. Goldstein or communications involving Mr. Goldstein. I think A through E relate to you, Mr. Goldstein.
Is there a page at the bottom, Mr.?
In mine, in complainant exhibits, it's the ones that down at the bottom say 723. Or I don't know why I should have put 720. But it's like look at July 23, page 1 through page 9. Are those exhibits?
I looked at exhibits A through D, and those appear to be either communications I drafted and sent out, or communication emails between myself and Mr. O'Brien.
Okay.
And the last one, exhibit D, is I think email communication between myself and you.
Okay. When you were doing this work, did you have any communications with anybody from Constant Content other than Jeff Longstreth?
I did not.
Okay. Were you ever, did anybody that you were trying to collect from ask you to talk to anybody like Anna Lippincott or somebody that was involved in Constant Content Building? Did those names did the name Anna Lippincott ever come up?
I don't even know that name now.
Okay. Okay, so you're on what's labeled page 3, it's part of exhibit A. But if you look down the bottom, there's page numbers that I put on these.
Yep, I see.
So that's the invoice for, you recognize that the invoice was sent to Schmidt?
Yes, that's an invoice that my clients provide to me, advising that for Ohio owed those monies to Constant Content.
Did you ever ask your client or anybody about the date of that invoice, 11/4/2020?
I did not.
Was it your belief that that invoice had been previously provided to the campaign, or you were the first person that decided to be on it?
I never asked that question, and again, not trying to reveal attorney-client privilege, but it's my common practice that if a client comes to me and they're looking to collect a debt, I'll inquire a little bit about the validity of the debt and then explain to them how we will attempt to collect that debt. So I don't go into really a lot of detail about whether the invoices are true and accurate. I just, the client, I have to trust them that what they're telling me is true.
Okay. Do you understand? So on this, on what happened when you sent, what were your interactions with the Schmidt campaign relating to this invoice or this collection attempt, which is Exhibit A?
I'm trying to remember, but I don't remember really having much communication with the Schmidt campaign. The only communication that I really remember is having communication with Mr. O'Brien.
Okay, and what was the nature of that communication?
From what I recall, Mr. O'Brien reached out to me, and basically was disputing the monies that were owed, and as some of the other individuals were asking if I could provide proof or documentation to support that the debt was owed. And then I typically would then speak to my client representative, the constant contact, Mr. Longstreth, and then I recall communicating back to Mr. O'Brien that this is what, I'm being told is owed. I don't have any proof of the mailers or anything like that. And then that was basically the extent of the conversation until we reached a resolution.
Okay. Did when you did you have any conversations with Gene Schmidt or Peter Schmidt about these?
I don't remember if I did.
So,
I hear Mr. Schmidt.
otherwise, I will point out this, Ms. Schmidt should probably not talk during somebody's testimony, but she previously testified that she had at least 2 calls with.
And she may have, I truly don't remember.
Okay.
I'm not denying, I didn't have conversations with her. I'd have to potentially to look back at my billing records or just to see, I just don't remember.
Do you know what the descriptions mean for these items?
I have no idea.
So you were acting as a collection agent of a debt for that you indicated you believe was for mail, postage, and dropping those. And we're asking for more information and are not familiar with any of the nomenclature used on the invoices.
There was no questions about what the nomenclature was. It was, again, what my understanding was what the services provided by Constant Content was for mailing and for those postcards. That's what my understanding was. So there was no really reason for me to ask my client about what exactly the descriptions were. And that was not raised by Mr. O'Brien when we were communicating about the debt.
The look in there, we might do this quick and then not need to look at it, but it's close by. So go forward to Exhibit F. Now, Exhibit F has nothing directly to do with you.
Okay.
Okay. See like Exhibit F is a note from Megan Spitz-Martin.
Yeah, and just met Megan Avalon.
Okay.
If that's her.
So, yeah, okay. So this is not associated with the Schmidt campaign. But it's, if you look at the top of F, it says 20 OH FRE 006, which appears to be some nomenclature that's similar to the invoice that's referring to specific mailers that are in here. You never saw anything like this? You never saw any mailers for any of these candidates, any of the actual physical mailers?
I did not.
Okay, and in your testimony just now was the first time you've ever done Megan Spitz-Martin?
If we're out in the lobby and she was waiting and I said, are you here to testify? She said, yes. I introduced myself. She says, I'm Megan. And that was basically then, and then I think she indicated to me that she did something for Constant Content or knew Jeff, and that was the end of the conversation, but I've never met her before.
Okay, so the only person that you spoke with about these bills, other than the candidates or the committees, was Jeff Longstreth?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Are you familiar with the organizational structure of Constant Content?
I am now. Really, the only thing I'm aware of is that Jeff, I believe, was the principal of that entity, but I'm not aware of any other members since it's Obviously, when all this came down regarding First Energy and House Builder, I think a number of documents were seized and Jeff did not have a lot of information to provide me regarding constant content.
Did you, going back to those exhibits A through those first couple of exhibits in that 723 section? So the agreement, can you characterize how you came to the agreement that 20,260 would be the right number?
From what I can recall, again, it's been a long time, is that Mr. O'Brien was disputing the amounts owed and the services that were provided. And Mr. O'Brien was saying that this is what he believed through his representation of Schmidt for Ohio was owed. And then obviously I would take that information back to my client. And then typically, like any collection of debt or any, when you're trying to resolve a case, there's a give and take, and then an agreement is reached about the amount of monies that would be owed.
And so that, if I look at that exhibit C, 20,260 invoice.
Yes,
Okay, so it says the description is, can you read what the description says there?
sure. It says, quote, 20 dash, excuse me, OH dash SCH dash 003P, 004P, 005P, and 006P.
Okay. And then the rate is, it's, by the way, if I look at that, that would be, would you agree that that's appears to be four unique things, 3P, 4P, 5P, and 6P?
I mean, it says what it says. I assume that, but I don't know what that means, but yes.
Okay, and then the rate there is total 20,260.
Correct.
So if I go back and I look at the invoice in exhibit A, which is page 3, it says page 3 at the bottom of mine.
Yes,
That's the 39,122 invoice. Is that, you recognize that the 20,260 is a line item on that invoice,
correct.
okay? And for the same things that you just read off.
Correct.
3P, 4P, 5P, 6P, okay. Would you also observe the line above, which appears to be for 1P and 2P?
Yes, on page 3 of exhibit.
Yeah.
A, I would agree with that.
Okay, and so if those were identified unique mailers, it would look like in both line items, each unique mailer was about $5,000 and change.
I guess I'm confused when you say unique mailers. What do you mean?
20 OH SHP, SCH.001P and SCH.002P, for example, being two mailers.
Again, as I testified earlier, I do not know what those descriptions mean, so I can't answer that.
If you go back and flip back to page 10, which is exhibit F.
Okay.
Now, this is not one of them on that invoice, but same, 20 OH.FRE.006, seeing that and seeing this, would you believe that those represent mailers?
I just don't know, because these are for Alan Freeman and they're not for Schmidt for Ohio, so I really don't know.
So I just want to be clear that you were the collection agent for these debts and didn't even know whether it was for one mailer, multiple mailers, whether a line item was for 2, 3, 4.
Correct. Right. I was a collection of the debt. My client advised me that this is monies owed. We didn't go into what services were provided. He just said these are the monies owed. And then I would send a letter to the prospective debtors and try and collect these monies.
Okay. On page 6, it's part of exhibit C,
Okay.
the 20,260 invoice. Who produced that invoice?
I believe my client produced that.
So Jeff
Constant.
Longstreth?
Well, constant content buying through Jeff Longstreet.
So they provided that to you.
Correct.
It wasn't pasted and copied.
I don't know how it was created. I can just tell you that once there was discussions and there was issues, like I said, Schmidt for Ohio was disputing the monies that were owed and whether those services were provided. And then once there was discussions with Mr. O'Brien and I had discussions with my client, then my client obviously said, well, these reached an agreement that these are the services that were provided and agreed that.
Okay, so your client then, did your client believe that the invoice on page 3? Help me to characterize which of the two of these is the correct scenario or the way to look at it. That your client would have maintained that what's on page 3, the 39,122 was the provided services, but then in order to settle the debt, agreed to take the 20,260 to end the matter.
I think I would agree that my client, Constant Content, believed it was owed $39,122 by Schmidt for Ohio's campaign. However, my client could not produce documentation or evidence to support the $39,122. And because of that, obviously, what Mr. O'Brien was saying is that, hey, you can't prove this. However, we believe we owe $20,260, and then that was an agreement that was reached because Schmidt for Ohio was saying that those are the services that they believe were provided by my client. Now, of course, my client disagreed, but that's what Schmidt for Ohio was telling me, and my client then decided to, instead of filing suit or going after the entire amount, decided to resolve the matter for that amount.
So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is Mr. O'Brien and the Schmidt campaign believe that 2008 SCH 003P, 004P, 005P, and 006P were activities for which they were obligated to pay.
I can't say whether that particular description, I just remember from what I can recall, Schmidt for Ohio was willing to pay the $20,260, and yes, that is reflected under the services for those, for the 003P through 006P.
I just want to clarify to make sure I understand whether that negotiation was more in the spirit of, to be simplistically, we'll pay about half of it, we think half of it's fair, versus these specific that specific line item was valid and the other line items were not valid.
I don't recall that it was like, hey, we're just gonna pay half of it. That, I don't recall that was being discussed. I think, again, from what I can recollect, because it's been a while, is that Schmidt for Ohio through Mr. O'Brien was disputing that these monies, the $39,122 was owed and that the services were provided. And I think there was, that Schmidt for Ohio, from what I can recall, agreed that they owed the $20,260, which does fall under the description that we've been talking about.
Right, and they would have come to that conclusion by their own research because you couldn't produce any evidence to support the billing.
I can't answer that. You'll have to ask Mr. O'Brien about that. I don't know how they arrived at that.
At the 20,000, but they specifically 20,260 was the number.
I believe 20,260 was the number that was agreed upon.
Okay. You and I had a conversation on June 6th, 2022. Do you agree with that? We had a conversation.
I don't recall the date. Is that the recording that that I asked for? Yeah, I listened to the recording. I don't recall the date.
Okay. When you hear the recording, do you recollect the conversation?
Yeah, I listened to it. I recollect the conversation.
Okay. I think your testimony has been consistent with that recording. Would you agree?
I hope so.
So because you even brought up that there were, because I think I originally called you about the Stewart campaigns. And then when I put why is this Goldstein guy showing up on other people's campaign finance reports? That's when I put it together that you were doing something. Do you recall us talking about the Stewart campaign, the ORP, the Freeman campaign, and Gene Schmidt's campaign? That we talked about multiple
I
campaigns.
remember talking about Freeman. The Stewart, I don't remember, but I'm not saying we do not have that conversation.
Okay.
I don't remember.
Did the ORP ever pay?
No. So
Did Stewart ever pay?
I don't believe so, but I have to look at my records.
Okay. Did Freeman ever pay?
No.
Okay. So the only person out of those four, at least, that paid some amount was Gene Schmidt. The grant campaign.
I believe so, but I'm not sure about the first person. I just would have to, that you mentioned, I just have to check my records.
Are you still engaged by Mr. Longstreth to try to collect on those ones that have not been paid?
I'm still engaged by Constant Content through Mr. Longstreth. Yes.
I asked before if you were familiar with the structure of Constant Content. And the answer was, I think, no, you're not.
Only that Jeff is, my understanding is the owner,
Is what?
is the owner.
Is the owner, okay. If you flip in the book back to the 927 little tab.
Okay.
Described as the hillbillies calculation of the book. So exhibit Q in the 927 exhibits.
And I apologize. Is this the one that starts with the committee to elect Alan Freeman, the letter?
So in that little book, there should be a little tab that says 927.
Right, I'm there.
Oh, yeah, okay. So before we look at that, on that, before we look at Q, since you're there, so I can look at N. These are in the exhibits I submitted for today.
If I may interrupt a minute, I don't believe we have an exhibit Q. Oh, it's the new, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right. Aisle 5. Okay. I've been following along, but I didn't see that one. You are, okay. Thank you. I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't know even.
So, so exhibit N, you familiar with exhibit N?
Yes.
Okay. So, and how did exhibit N come to you?
Sure. I believe that I was contacted by either you indicating that you were going to subpoena me or had previously subpoenaed me, but I never received service of that subpoena. And at some point in time, I don't know if it was Mr. Richter or someone emailed me asking if I would accept service of a subpoena for today's hearing. I said, yes. And then you and I had conversation saying, in order to avoid me appearing today, would I be willing to sign an affidavit? And I said, yes. You drafted an affidavit. I made revisions to that affidavit, and then I signed the exhibit.
Okay, and then that, I apologize, you have to be here today after doing that. So within this, you have, you included some other exhibits, including one of them on page 5 is page 5, it says at the bottom within there.
Yeah.
Exhibit N. That's the Alan Freeman exhibit because it's dealt with other, which is the large, it's a similar kind of invoice from Constant Content. Now, what I asked you though was about the structure. So that was exhibit Q. We ended up at N, but I just wanted to get that very quickly. So why don't we flip forward to exhibit Q? It's page 11 at the bottom.
I am there.
So based on looking at that, what kind of entity is Constant Content? Exhibit Q.
Right, I'm looking at exhibit Q, filing on articles of incorporation. It looks like it says Constant Content Company, CEO.
Okay, so is it a LLC or a corporation?
I mean, according to this file, it looks like corporation.
Okay. In your work with Jeff Longstreth, did it ever come up that you were doing any work for another entity called JPL and Associates?
No.
Are you aware of JPL and Associates at all?
The only reason I'm aware of JPL Associates is Mr. Longstreth has received numerous subpoenas from several entities since the first energy matter. And I have seen in those subpoenas JPL mentioned, but I don't really know.
You don't have any.
I don't represent JPL.
It's never been part of your discussions with Mr. Longstreth.
Sorry, Lee, I'm not going to go into the discussions I have with Mr. Longstreth.
Okay.
Because the attorney Kleinbridge, the only thing I'll say is I do not represent JPL. I don't.
You've not been retained for JPL. Okay. Are you familiar with the campaign finance laws related to corporations?
Not at all.
Okay, so if you're. So like, if you look at. And, okay. So if you look at exhibit O, which is back on page 7. It was in that, with right, right before Q, so there's. Oh, no,
Hopefully it's before.
okay. So if you look at, on the back side of that, on the page labeled 7 is instructions for the form. And this is for recording death.
Page 7.
Yeah, so page 7.
Okay, I'm there.
So if you look at the left side of that, there's 2 paragraphs, the bottom paragraph, like 4 lines up halfway through, it starts with A, the A starts on a, you know, would be a, maybe if you could just read that part from where that letter A is on a separate line, and then that just through the end of that paragraph.
Objection, having this witness read forms from, I think it's a Secretary of State form. It speaks for itself. I don't, Mr. Goldstein said he had no knowledge of campaign finance, matters.
Yeah, well, I mean, what are you thinking?
Well, then I'll read it and ask a question. So I have a question for you about that statement.
Can you, and I apologize, can you direct me where, I guess some of those.
So if you look at that, see where it says the instructions for Form 31N, it looks like that.
It says the top statement of outstanding debts, Form 30.
Yes, yeah,
And then it begins outstanding debts.
yes. And then the second paragraph of that. Halfway, a little more than halfway down, there's a line that starts A at the end of a line.
And then corporation.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I'm gonna ask you a question about this, but it says a corporation engaged in business can only forgive debt owed by a valid issue committee. Forgiveness of debt owed by a non-valid issue committee would be a court contribution by the corporation and therefore illegal. So when your client was representing that they had done all these 39,000 worth of work and then agreeing to essentially forgive 18,000. And your client was a corporation, wouldn't that be a corporate contribution? Just for,
I don't feel comfortable in answering that because I have no idea, because again, do civil litigation, I do absolutely nothing with election law or campaign finance, so I do not feel comfortable to answer that question. I mean, the only thing I can say is my client, as a corporation, believed it was owed certain monies from candidates as we described. And obviously in this particular case, Schmidt for Ohio disputed that she was owed those monies. So I'm not sure how that comports with this. I guess I'll leave it up to the experts.
okay, so, but you're a lawyer. And you were engaged specifically for the collection of campaign finance debts owed to a corporation. Didn't research the laws relating to corporations and campaign finance.
I guess I respectfully disagree with you. I was asked to collect debts that were owed by, basically politicians or prospective politicians. And that's what my role was. I was not looking into campaign finance or violations of any rules regarding candidates or campaigns.
So if you go back to exhibit A, which is page 1 of the same section you're in, you're still in the section that would have exhibit A. No, it would be before that, the 723 section. Exhibit A. Find an exhibit A. Who is your letter to?
The debtor, Schmidt for Ohio.
So what did Schmidt for Ohio? Is that a candidate? Or a legal campaign entity?
Basically, I do not know. I never really, it was not a concern of mine to collect, it's my client telling me Schmidt for Ohio's money. I really was not concerned at this point when you send a collection letter as to the entity whether it's a C corp, S corp, political, campaign or anything like that nature. That was really not my concern when I'm trying to collect the debt.
Do you do debt collection for non-political entities?
We do some of it. We don't do a lot of debt collection, but we do some.
So when you do debt collections, do you do any consumer debt collection or business debt collection?
We do some for business.
Now, aren't there certain laws and rules about what you're allowed to do as a debt collector? Like you can't call people out on.
There's certain pretty basic things that we would never do. Yeah, you can't call people, you can't harass them, that type of thing.
So, but in this case, when you did these, you were sending to the campaign committee. And I think the Stewart invoice is the same to this, and to Brian Stewart.
I will tell them all the invoices I sent out there, all the demand letters, collection letters I sent are all basically identical.
Okay, but, but you had not, just to clarify for sure, you had not at that time or subsequent had any, did anything to observe what any of the laws were relating to collecting, debts from campaign committees?
I did not, just didn't think it was necessary.
So had you been aware of, well, if you could look at exhibit P, which says page 8 in the 927 section. Exhibit P, the newer ones.
From there.
So does that, this is the statute, I'm not gonna relate to the statute before. Now, when you leave here, let me try to make it in a collegial way. When you leave here, given that you're still in the act of trying to collect campaign debt for a corporation, will you spend some time researching what these laws are?
Well, I guess, no. I mean, how is this statute, use of corporation labor organized funds for political, relate to my trying to collect debt? I guess, and I'm not trying to argue with you, it's like, I have a client who comes to me, says I provided these services, whether to a political campaign, politicians, whatever you want to call it. And he says the monies are owed. I was not aware of any laws that don't allow me to send a collection letter to these entities saying you owe this money. And so this statute, I haven't had a chance to look at, it looks like it would not apply to me. And I'm not going to threaten, I don't threaten anyone, I'm not going to threaten candidates or politicians to say, if you don't pay this, I'm coming to this committee or I'm reporting. I don't, that would be, in my opinion, unethical and potentially a violation of collecting debts. So I look at this statute and I haven't read it fully, but I don't think it would apply to me trying to collect the monies that I believe Constant Content is owed.
But when you are, collecting, wouldn't that's, so the statute in the thing on the form, on the Secretary of State form, which is a very net version of the statute, that's why I pointed to the form, because it's, that specifically makes legal rules as to the ability of a corporation to negotiate or forgive debt when it relates to campaign debt. Because otherwise, you might have, at Kroger could pay $10 million and then say we forgive all that with everything we were owed. And so my question is, how would that not apply? That you would need to be as a lawyer collecting debt for a corporation to do campaign work? How would it not apply that you're not allowed to forgive debt?
I can't answer that. I don't know. Again, I've not researched this. I'm telling you what I believe at the time that, about the debt and what we did. And remember, I guess it's sort of interesting. You're saying forgiveness of a debt, but obviously there's a dispute in this particular case, especially with Schmidt for Ohio, as to whether, the debt was owed or not owed. Obviously, it was my position through my client that the monies were owed by Schmidt for Ohio. Schmidt for Ohio said, we don't owe those monies. We only owe these monies for the services provided. My client could not provide me proof to show and prove the debt if we were to file a lawsuit or take other action. So therefore, he agreed to the number that we've already previously discussed.
Okay, so if you go look at, it is exhibit number 6. So it's going to be way towards the front. It's going to be in that first section that says 5-4, 5-4. And then the page number for that is hard to read because it is, it's over the top of other typing. But it's exhibit 6, it's a bunch of exhibits in there, if you can read it. It's page 78 actually in there, it's hard to read those numbers at the bottom. 73, page 73. It's harder to read. Page 75 is easy to read because there's nothing, it's if you go to page 75.
So hold on, let me, you want me on exhibit 6? There's a exhibit 6, the only one I have is just a check.
Exhibit 6. So we would be in the 5-4 section. So, to the front set,
Yeah,
right next to the list, the
I don't
5-4
interrupt you.
section.
Sir,
If you go to page 75,
that's exhibit 6.
go to page 75, so exhibit, that's within
Okay,
an exhibit, there's a bunch of sub exhibits. It'll be easier to find if you go to page 74, 75, then we're gonna flip back to one page,
fair.
because the page number is blocked out on page.
so page 74 says exhibit 13, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
So flip back one page, because actually when you look at the prior page, but it's, if you look at it,
okay,
the page number is disrupted by the printing that was already there.
okay,
So this is not your invoice. Okay, but it's a debt. And it's a constant content debt. And if you notice on the far right column, what's the bottom and the header, what's the bottom line say?
I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right place. I thought I was not familiar. Is this what you want me to look at right here? It's labeled campaign
The
finance.
bottom one of that.
Right, but I want to make sure.
Yes,
I want to make sure I'm on the right page.
yes.
Okay, let me just finish. So you're asking where it says 31N constant content company.
Correct.
Okay,
And this is not your invoice, by the way. So this is not, I'm just using that for illustrative purposes. So I can remember where it was. You see on the right side of that, the bottom line. It says, in the header. What does it say?
where it says employer / PAC number purpose forgiven.
Okay,
Is that what you're asking?
yes, okay. So the, would you? So a corporation, an LLC could forgive that, but a corporation cannot if it believes that debt is valid. So are you aware of that distinction?
I am not.
Or were you aware of that distinction before now?
If you're telling me that's the distinction, this is the first time I'm hearing of it. Again, I have no knowledge about campaign financing.
Okay.
It's like subject to existence.
Do you do any work outside of mailers that were done by Constant Contents? Do you do any collection work for the Ohio Republican Party? And I know you're not doing that for the Ohio Republican.
No.
I said that poorly. You don't do any work for the Ohio Republican Party?
Do I do any work for
Yeah.
them? No.
No, other than trying to collect from them,
Well, just,
for Jeff Longstreth.
yeah,
For Constant
concept.
Okay, so you don't do any work for the Ohio Republican Party. Have you ever met or know of Rob Secor,
He doesn't ring a bell.
RJ Mancini?
No,
Are you familiar with the term HRCC?
no,
Okay, have you ever heard of Stephen Carraway?
no.
You met Megan Fitzmartin in the hallway for the first time.
Yeah.
You've never met or know of Anna Lippincott?
Name just not sound familiar.
On any of the work we've been trying to collect for, was there ever any discussion of it being for field services like door knockers and things like that?
No,
Okay. So it was only, as far as you know, it was for mail, postage and drops.
yeah, and that's what, again, that's what I was told. That's, and my client was advising me allowed to say that, but that's what we told, obviously, that people are collecting. Those are the only things that I understand.
On any of the, either this or anything else you're at liberty to discuss, have you ever seen any backup to support what's on the invoices? Like an example of a mailer or a bill from a printer?
I've never seen a bill from the only thing maybe I might have seen like a sample mailer. Maybe, I know it was not for Schmidt for Ohio, and it wasn't those ones that you showed me for, I think, Freeman. I can't remember because I didn't know exactly what it was. So I think Mr. Longstreth just showed me something like a sample of what it was.
Okay. And your collection efforts were all about the same time, like the date you were contacted the Schmidt for Ohio campaign, 8/6/21, or 8, is that right?
Yeah, it's somewhere in that time frame. If that's,
Okay, so in the, 2-year, right, 2-year period since then, of the ones that have come up here, Freeman, Stewart, the ORP, and Schmidt, the only person that has paid anything you're aware of is Schmidt?
are those 4, yes.
Okay, have other clients paid?
I think maybe one other person has paid.
Okay.
Can't remember who that is, but yeah, I think 1, maybe 2.
Okay. And, is there? What would you say is the #1 reason the other people haven't paid? Or the explanation they give is why they're not paying?
Sure, the individuals or their attorneys that I've spoken with basically have said, we want to see proof, we want to see proof. And I really can't, as I've indicated today, my client doesn't have documentation other than his own word in the invoices to establish that.
And you never had any proof that you could give to the Schmidt campaign?
Oh, other than the invoice and the representations of
Okay,
Mr.
but no
Bonson.
examples of mailers, bills from printers, things like that.
Correct.
So why then did the Schmidt campaign pay you anything?
Hoping because they're honest. I mean, they believe that the services were provided and that they.
But you're not sure, but there are no specific services?
Well, again, from my recollection, it's been a while. If you look at the emails between myself and Mr. O'Brien, Schmidt campaign was disputing that the services that my client indicated were provided on the original invoice. I believe the Schmidt campaign agreed that the services that they eventually paid for were provided, and that's why they paid for it.
Okay, so that would mean that you believe that that it was represented to you that they thought that that line item was legitimate and the other line items were not.
I believe that's the case, my guess is they would not have paid anything.
All right, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Goldstein, your original letter to Schmidt went to her campaign committee in Loveland, Ohio, correct?
Yes.
And that was on or about August 6th, at least according to the certified letter.
Yeah, I see my assistant didn't put the date on here, but yes, that's correct.
That certified letter is dated August 3rd.
Okay.
That would be correct.
I would have no reason to.
And I contacted you a week later via email on August 13th, correct?
That is correct.
And there's an exhibit there that reflects that
Which exhibit?
in the pack.
Exhibit B.
And in that, I indicated that I did represent the Schmidt campaign committee. She received a letter just this week that it was dated November 8th of 2020, that we had not seen the invoice before and that we did not understand or know what the services described there. And at least I think I referred to the numbers as.
Can I ask for a clarification? Because exhibit D in my book is.
B as in boy.
Oh, B. Okay, go ahead.
And in that email, I indicated that the description for the services was unknown, had names and numbers that we didn't understand, and we didn't know that what those services were for, correct?
That's correct.
And at that point in time, did I ask you if you have any justification for this bill, please provide it and we'll pay it?
Yes.
And this email was back in August of 2021. Did I call you several months later and say, Mr. Goldstein, have you found anything that supports your claim for $39,000?
You did, as I previously mentioned, that's when I was trying to gather the information through the postal carrier and do an investigation because my client could not produce what was needed to support the debt.
And any delay in this whole process before there was a negotiated payment was caused by you and or Mr. Longstress trying to find information or justification for the bill you sent. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And eventually an amount of $20,000 was negotiated. You sent a new bill and we paid, correct?
Yes.
And how many of those letters did you send out to campaign committees? Do you know?
A lot, at least 15 to 16, somewhere in that, maybe more,
15 to 16 you sent out.
maybe more.
And I think, you said that maybe one other person besides me, Gene Schmidt paid the negotiated, amount for the billing.
One or two, yes.
And that was done in January of, 22 and, the constant content was paid, correct?
Yes.
And the balance, was written off by constant content, correct?
I don't know what constant content did, again, because there was a dispute, so we could not prove that the debt was owed, so I'm not sure what constant content did with the debt, but obviously, Schmidt for Ohio doesn't owe any additional monies to constant content.
And if you had to file a lawsuit and go to court, could you have proven, 39,000 or 20,000?
Well, I mean, as you know, the burden of proof, the only testimony would have been from Jeff Longstreth, who's now basically a convicted felon, so it might have been a little bit challenging if we could try in front of a judge or a jury.
Okay, if I can approach the, witness, I'm gonna hand you respondents exhibit number 11. Is a prior invoice,
They're all in that, bill, so if you just want to dump it.
okay, well,
Yours are in there too.
I don't know what, not always in.
Use one.
Yeah, why don't I just hand that to make it easier? As respondents exhibit 11, if the prior invoice content in, I believe March of 20,
That's what it says.
and, it's for a total of $164,000.
That's what it's,
And you were not collecting any part of that invoice, were you?
no, I've never seen this invoice to show today.
And there's, some, descriptions, on that invoice that are somewhat similar to, the invoice you sent to the Schmidt campaign. That
Yes, I'm gonna object because he's already said he had nothing to do with this invoice. So what's the purpose of the line of questioning?
Go ahead, what's the purpose?
I hadn't finished my question first, but, I think the purpose is to, have the witness, compare the kind of numbers that are on the invoice in March that reference 20-OH-SCH-002, which are similar kinds of numbers to the bill that was sent in August of 21. In looking at those, are others under numbers and references that aren't specific and easily understandable on both of them? I guess is my point. Reasonable, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just for the you're listening, I'm looking at exhibit A under tab 723, which is the Schmidt for Ohio invoice that I sent. Mr. O'Brien's asked me to compare that to exhibit 11, and I mean, I guess your question is, yeah, I mean, there's similarities, like if you look at exhibit 11, it says 20-OH-SCH-002 on one of the line items. It's looking invoice that's exhibit A, it's similar, it's 20-OH-SCH- on these, it says over one, but then there's a P. So I guess there are similarities and not similarities, if that's what you're asking.
And since they were not specific, other than those non-understandable numbers and references, that it seemed reasonable to you for us to have questioned, have we billed for this before and been paid for this before?
Yeah, I mean, if I was any individual and I'm receiving an invoice saying you owe this money, and you're saying, well, this is different from previous invoices, we don't understand why we owe this, or what did you provide? Yeah, that makes it's reasonable in my opinion.
And if we continue to ask what Mr. Longstreth had to prove to justify his services, you were unable to provide anything other than the invoice itself in his word.
Through constant content and Mr. Longstreth, that is correct.
I had another question. Thank you.
Yeah, but do you normally do, if they have any questions before the?
Well, go ahead, it's something we can use it when we see.
Okay, so. I'm gonna have you look at, thank you, invoices again real quick. So the exhibit 11. The third item. Yeah, the third item down. It dated 2/12/2020. What's that? Can you see that item?
Is that the one that says cable air?
Yes, correct.
I do see that.
Do you see any cable airtime type charges on the invoice you provided?
On exhibit A, no.
Okay, photo shoot is the first line item. You see any photo shoot type items on your?
Yeah, I mean, and just maybe to speed things up, and I don't need to interrupt. Looking at comparing exhibit 11 to exhibit A, I will present none of the line items on exhibit A, which is the invoice I sent to Schmidt Brow, matches up with anything on the exhibit 11 that I can see from the language.
Did you also, agree that there are items in exhibit 11 that are clearly beyond, mailers, postage and mail drums?
The language is, I don't know what those were, but obviously photo shoot, stickers, cable airtime, radio airtime, yes.
Okay, so and you previously represented that you were collecting specific to, postage, mailers and drums.
It didn't say drops, just to be clear. What I said was, again, what my client told me, it's allowed me to say, and I've told other people, is that he advised the invoices that I sent out for collection, including Schmidt for Ohio, was for postage, and then those postcards that I previously mentioned,
Okay, so,
that are like mailers, I guess.
okay, so in the call that we had, and I'm not, it's to be a distinction without a difference, so I'm not trying to harp on it, I think. You made a representation on the call that I can play if we want to play the recording. I guess here, okay, that all I was doing was invoices for, like I said, postage, mailers, and those drops. So the term drops is frequently used to referring to the whole process of getting a mailer out and drop it.
Yeah, I believe that's what I meant, drop it off. Back in my early days, I started my career in some governmental offices, and you have to go do lid drops, which I'm sure everyone's
Right.
So that was not what I was referring to, like a lid drop. That's my understanding. It was like dropping at the post office.
Okay, so that's, I just wanted, I wasn't trying to,
No,
it's a
that's,
tricky question, but the drops in the context of that term relating to the function of getting something in the mail.
I believe so. I
Okay.
believe so. I could be wrong, but yes, that was my understanding.
So Mr. O'Brien was questioning you just now. He referred to is that you negotiated the amount and that the balance was written off and you responded affirmatively to both of those things. When I questioned you, you had said it was your understanding they had agreed that the items on that line item, the 20,260 line item were valid items. What's the right answer?
Sure. So let me clarify. My recollection, and all of you rely upon what you heard, but I said I did not know if Constant Content wrote it off. My understanding is that there was a dispute between Schmidt for Ohio and Constant Content as to what services were provided and what was owed. And Schmidt for Ohio, my understanding, agreed that they owed the 20,260. And that's why a subsequent invoice was created. And I don't know for what purpose again, but that's my understanding.
I just want to be clear that in the testimony to me, you represented that they were agreeing that those items listed in the description were valid and paying.
Well,
Versus the concept that was we negotiated from 39 down to 20 and picked that line out as go.
I guess it's poor. I'm making an assumption. I mean, I would think that Mr. O'Brien would not pay for something that was not provided by Constant Content. And so that's why again, it's my position that based upon the fact that we redid the invoice, that's what Schmidt for Ohio was agreeing to pay, and that those agreed to terms of the services provided.
So it was reported in the press that the records of Constant Content were seized by the feds. Do you think that played any role in the inability to provide detail?
Well, I wish Constant Contact had all their documents, including proof to, proof to show that all the services they provided and all their invoices, where that was there, so I could, assist them to collect all these money. So yeah, I would that. was-
And I know
Available.
I'm asking a question, you should might object to the whole thing. Did your client express to you that it was difficult to find the information because it had been seized by the feds?
I don't think I ever asked him that question. I don't have a comment. I don't think I ever asked him that question. I just was like, do you have any documentation? Do you have everything? And he's like, we just don't have it.
Okay,
I don't think I went into about seizing and where the information is.
okay, and all that, it has to be very, very frustrating trying to collect, and I'm sure you get some percentage of what you collect, I don't care what that is. But then your client can't produce documents, but you're saying you never had any deeper discussion about why he can't produce backup?
He just didn't have, I mean, again, this happened a long time ago. Constant Content, we know that search warrants were executed on Mr. Longstreth on a number of the businesses he was involved in. And so I just said, do you have more documentation? And he just could not produce that documentation. Where that is right now, whether FBI still has it or it's just gone, I do not know the answer to that.
Okay, all right, I think I have no further questions.
Questions from commissioners? Dr. Goldstein?
I got one. And understand this is a unique situation, given the indictment and whatnot. But did you have any conversations in any of these cases, I guess specific to Schmidt is the most important one, around why Constant Contact Mr. Longstreet didn't send the invoice to Schmidt for Ohio, contact Schmidt for Ohio? I mean, typically, right, at least in my experience with debts, when I invoice my clients, for example, if they haven't paid, I resend the invoice and then I call. I mean, it doesn't go to a collection agent until way down the road when you feel it's uncollectible. Here, it seems, at least from what I've heard, the Constant Content went straight to a debt collector mailing. Can you maybe help me understand why there wasn't that kind of interaction with Schmidt for Ohio in regards to these invoice services that you were collecting?
So just so I understand your question, sir, you're asking why did Constant Contact directly contact Schmidt for Ohio as opposed to coming to me?
Well, at least, yeah, that would be typical, right?
I think because of what was transpiring with First Energy.
Okay.
I think that is my understanding on, again, I don't believe I'm revealing anything that's privileged, but I think that because with First Energy that since Mr. Longstreth, my understanding, was the sole owner of Constant Content, he was more likely not, I'm assuming this based upon my past experience, being advised by counsel not to speak with anyone about anything.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, thank you.
I have one question. I'm not sure whether it's a question or a comment, but I'll phrase it as a question. It was brought to your attention that corporations are not allowed to forgive a debt without being considered a donation to be recorded. But since it's Constant Content forgiving the debt, would it be their responsibility to report that, or as opposed to your responsibility?
You say, so if I,
You mean if it was 39,122 and then it was paid off as 2260, would that be Constant Content's responsibility in forgiving that, or is that your responsibility?
say you're the attorney,
Yes, correct. As a collection agent.
I wish I could answer that question. I don't know. I don't think it would be. I mean, again, I'll sit here. I was not familiar with that statute. I didn't know that it had any applicability to what I was doing. So I unfortunately, I don't think I can answer that question as to whether that duty would fall upon the corporation or upon the attorney. mean, as I sit here today, I'll tell you that if that is the law, that when a debt is written off or forgiven, the corporation is to do something with that information, then that's probably something as a lawyer that I should have known and then advised Constant Content. But we all know Constant Content has been doing this for years, so I can only assume that Mr. Longstreth was maybe had known that, but I don't know. That's an assumption. So
Thank you. Could I ask a follow-up to that?
Sure.
So looking at the exhibits here, the way that the settlement was recorded was as a payment to David A. Goldstein, PA, as opposed to Constant Content. And, you know, as is typical in these situations, you ask that the check be made out to you, to your firm, as opposed to your client. Which I understand is all difficult. I guess in your expertise, as a lawyer who does debt collection, to me at least, this is important to how it should be recorded by and by whom, is the debt to you, which the check was made to you, the Secretary of State recorded it as a settlement to your firm. Is it to you, your LPA firm, or your client, Constant Content?
I mean, the debt to me is I'm not getting the money. We get the check,
And you keep your.
put it in our trust account, put it in our trust account, and then do what then my client will instruct me what to do with that as funds. So that I am not the debtor
Okay,
by any means.
okay.
But
Thank you.
it's just payment instructions. Like, I'll give you an example. Again, I don't do a lot of debt collection. I do like insurance defense, personal injury, other litigation. You settle a personal injury case, a lot of times, sometimes the carrier will just make the check right up to the attorney. Or if you said, like I just settled an employment case where they're making it directly out to me, putting it in my trust account, then I'm dispersing it to my clients, but I'm not obviously the individual or entity was harmed by that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Madam Chair, that's a question. I'm just thinking about this at large, you know, all of the people, the individuals taken out of the equation, looking at the scenario. Is it possible that the bills that were issued were not ever accurate at all? And when they were mitigated and pushed back on, then the reason they're pulling back the debt is because it may not have been accurately assigned from the get-go. Because if somebody's in a state of distress, they may or may not be issuing any type of bill to get said debts addressed in a larger pool. And, you know, I'm just thinking about when any organization, any entity, anybody's getting press or PR that is negative to that degree, I imagine that staff is fleeing. I don't know if that was the case in this scenario, but I can just see an operation that's pretty massive going to a one-man shop almost overnight, and then people doing anything that they can to try to collect. And so I wonder, was it potentially misassigned debt from the initial state? And it's just the parties that were receiving it either were accepting and acknowledging it, or were fighting back to get it mitigated to the right size fit for the services actually received. And there wasn't good tracking on the part of those that were sending bills out.
And that's a good question. I wish I could answer that. From an attorney standpoint, when Constant Content hired me, I wanted all information to support the debt, because I know when you send these letters out, it's going to say, we want proof. And unfortunately, Mr. Longstreth through Constant Content could not provide me anything. And that's not a good thing from when you're sitting in my shoes. And so when we did send this out, and Mr. O'Brien, as I indicated, reached out to me, they are disputing the debt. They're saying, David, give us proof, give us proof, give us proof. And I'm going to my client saying, what do you have? What do you have? Well, we did all these mailers. And I'm like, let me do some research. Let me try and help you. And so obviously Constant Content believes that their invoice is correct and accurate, but as you indicated, I don't know who else worked in the office. There could be mistakes. You know, it could have been for other candidates. I mean, like I said, I was doing 15 to 20 of these, somewhere in that range of trying to collect from different entities, you know, for Constant content. So I just can't, I wish I had all that. And so, because that might have changed things, you know, if I were able to show Mr. O'Brien, here's A, B, C, D, E, everything we did for Schmidt for Ohio, here we go, we're owed the monies, that would be different. But Mr. O'Brien is obviously saying, we disagree with you. And as many of these other candidates have said to me, that we just don't believe we owe the monies. And whether, you know, whether they believe that these services were in fact provided. I'm just going on the word of my client.
Yeah, Madam Chair, the only reason I ask the question is because it seems to me it'd be hard to understand what is actual a liability of, if it was not reflected in actual product, how you would assume that it was a debt forgiven or stand on that concretely. I'm not saying it's not an excellent valid point that's been brought to us, but to me, it sounds like it's unknown whether anything was or was not received. And so that
And
are lacking clarity on our part.
And again, the debt for forgiveness, I can't answer whether, you know, the debt was in fact forgiven because there's dispute as to what the debt was owed. And so Constant Content says, fine, we'll take this. And I don't know what Constant Content did with the remainder, but Constant Content agreed that this was the monies that were owed and accepted that. So I'm not even sure that there was a forgiveness of debt. That's something that would have to be addressed by Constant Content, not by me.
So there was, in your mind, in your client's mind, evidence that work was done for that 20,260 that satisfied you, satisfied your client?
Sure. And just to understand, the only thing that was in my mind that satisfied me is based on the representations made by my clients. I had no proof otherwise, you know, as I indicated. So I relied upon what my client was telling me. And based upon what my client was telling me, that was the justification, correct? That answers your question.
I guess my question is really getting to, was there more evidence that the 20,260 was in fact owed versus those other items on the invoice that initially were said to be owed?
The only evidence that I had was my client's word. And then when Mr. O'Brien, you know, we were negotiating and we redid the invoice, I made the assumption that Schmidt for Ohio was being truthful and saying, okay, these services were provided. That's why we're willing to pay for them. That's the only, I'm making an assumption there. It's not, you know, that's the only evidence I had.
I guess I just want clarity. You saw nothing that showed a mailer. These are the mailers that we design, produce, and it costs X amount for the paper, et cetera, or for the stamps, et cetera, or this, the one that had the 4 different 005 for, et cetera. You didn't see anything that substantiated more than those other invoices for various amounts that showed your client could prove that something was in fact done for that 20,260.
Correct. I had no other corroborating evidence other than my client's testimony. No mailers, no postage information. No. Correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, things pop in my head. So, and I mean, I guess you could answer it specifically to Mr. Longstreet, that's a content, but probably under attorney-client privilege, so I'll ask it more broadly. Understanding that it's not your core business, do you typically charge an hourly rate plus commission or just straight commission on collection?
Sure. Typically, I don't do a lot, so it depends for who you're doing. Mr. Longstreth, I got to know him after the First Energy, and so we built a relationship sort of outside of the legal area. So he came to me, I said, sure, I'll help you out with this. And so, you know, so there you usually can do a different arrangement, whether it's, hey, I'm going to bill you hourly or do contingent. I'll represent him. I don't have a problem. I was billing him hourly for this at a low hourly rate. I do that for some other clients sometimes when they come to me, but if it's someone who I really don't know and I think it's a good case and we can collect the debt, then I will do a percentage. I mean, as an attorney, when you decide whether to do something hourly on a contingent, depending on the case, you look at the risk to the attorney. Hey, is this a really good case? And I could collect, 100, 200,000 and take a third or 25% where great. Or this is a tough one. I'm going to bill you hourly on this because, I don't want to take the risk. So it's considerations on what you do in fact by fact basis.
Well, you answered, the second question is going to be, did you charge a higher commission rate given the lack of evidence supporting it, but you charged an hourly rate?
I charge an hourly rate because, again, like I indicated, when I first got it, I'm like, I need proof. And it's like, David, the invoices and my word. It's like, okay, it's gonna be, it's gonna be an uphill battle.
Sure. Thank you.
Appreciate your patience.
Yep. Right there. Thank you. Thank you, David.
It's nice to meet you.
Take care.
Everyone.
Oh, I apologize. If you want Megan, because she said call her on it because she's going back to her office. That is what she told me.
That's fine.
Thank you. So at this point, let's break to lunch. Is it okay to come back at 1 o'clock?
Yeah.
20-minute break, is that?
20 minutes is fine. That's perfect.
Can I ask a procedural question? So you still sent a note yesterday saying that we were going to finish at 4 today. Is that a hard thing or not? I'm only asking because my car's parked in a place that closes at 5. So it's
That's all.
not a hard thing. I want to move my
That's the
car.
hard stop I have to be. And
Okay, I just
You're
want to
gonna
make
see
sure,
me
because I don't want my
running
car
out
being
of
locked
order or
out.
not.
Okay,
Okay, so we're gonna take a recess right now, or break, or whatever you call it. We'll be back at 1.
Will that be Mrs. Martin and Warren? Mr. Dix, that will be Mr. Martin.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, it's 1:16. I'm gonna call our session back. We are meeting back into session, so. At this point, Mr. Higgs.
Megan, this time.
Thank you. So hearing the open screen.
Please raise your hand. Swear to tell truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do.
There, thank you. We've only ever met in these locations. So, thank you for appearing. So, Ms. Martin, can you just describe relating to, kind of from the 2020 campaign forward, with your role in that campaign and what do you do now? The 2020 primary campaign.
In the 2020 primary campaign cycle, I was contracted with JPL Associates and Constant Content to do work for Ohio House races in the Republican Party.
And then when did that begin and when did that end?
In the 2020 cycle?
Yeah.
So, the day after the election day in 2018, and because they're 2-year terms.
Okay, so you worked for Constant Content JPL from the end of the last election all the way through that.
No, sir, sorry, you asked what my involvement is with the 2020 cycle.
Let me
So I engaged with JPL, my company, contracted with JPL and Associates and Constant Content in September of 2017. So wow.
September of 2017.
Yes, sir.
So September, 2020 was not the first primary that you helped with, okay. Okay. And you said JPL Constant Content, can you describe who you work for? You work for both of them or what was?
So again, my LLC was contracted with JPL and Associates for political consulting and Constant Content for media.
And what was the name of your LLC?
MC Fitchmartin LLC.
Did you do work with any other entities other than Constant Content and JPL Associates during that general time period of 2017? I guess you're saying through.
Yeah, I believe I worked on grants and such. I was contracted with a couple of entities.
Okay, anything involving political campaigns or?
No, sir.
Okay, in the 20.
Sorry, let me just clear. No, not in those cycles.
Okay, so subsequent to that or prior to that?
Yeah, of course.
Which that?
Of course, yes. That's what, that's my career. So yeah, I've been contracted with a number of campaigns and political entities.
Okay, just so I'm clear from about, I'm not asking specific, September 2017 to when was the end date of per se your employment or your, well, I guess it wasn't employment, your contract. When did your LLC contract end with Constant Content or?
I terminated my association with both JPL and Associates and Constant Content on July 21st, 2020.
Why that date?
That was the date that I no longer felt that I should be associated with those.
You remember, okay, so that was due as a result of the indictments.
Yes, sir.
Okay, do you remember, I'm not, it's not in front of me, not an exact date, the indictments were a little bit before that, a week before.
That was the exact day.
That's exact, so the
Yep.
day of the indictments.
I terminated my association.
So did you, when the indictments happened, there was your presumption that I should immediately resign because they're probably guilty?
Yes, sir. I just no longer wanted to be affiliated with that, with those two entities.
So did you not consider that they were innocent?
I believe that anyone in a professional setting would just want to separate, part ways and start, a different course.
So you wouldn't, so they had employed you from 2017.
Well, they had not employed me.
Or, I'm sorry, I said that you were a contractor. So they employed M. Stephen Martin LLC. from September 2017. And then you terminated your arrangement with them on the same day as they were indicted. Did you have any conversations with them about whether they were guilty or not, or, you know,
So
so you just immediately were on the
no
door?
conversations with that, but the principal of either entity.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
I had no conversations with the principal of either entity.
And
I
so,
simply submitted it. I sent an email,
okay, so who was the principal of Constant Contact?
Jeff Longstrap,
Who was the principal of JPL on the
Jeff
side?
Longstrap.
So when you said principal of either entity, that's one person in the same.
Correct.
So during your tenure, was anybody that you're aware of an actual W-2 employee of Constant Content?
Not to my knowledge, but that wasn't my wheelhouse.
Okay. Well, I've been a consultant, I'm gonna ask you a question, and I would always know I'm contracted by a client. So your contract then was directly with Jeff Longstrap?
It was directly with JPL and Associates. Like, again, my LLC was directly contracted with JPL and Associates and separately Constant Content.
Well, who was the individual that you signed a contract with, or you agreed
I
verbally?
never signed the contract.
So you never had a contract? But who did you have a verbal agreement, a verbal contract with that?
Principal of each LLC, so Jeff Longstrap.
So Jeff Longstrap.
Yes.
So as far as you were concerned, Jeff Longstrap was the sole sort of employee of,
I believe the technical terms proprietor of an LLC.
that would be a sole proprietorship. So there's different, so, okay, but a Constant Content was a Constant Content a corporation, not an LLC.
I don't know the answer to that. It's Constant Content.
Okay. Did you get paid by both entities?
I received, yes, payment from both entities.
And you received 1099s for both entities?
So
Okay. After, were you personally contacted by the FBI relating to Constant Content and JPL's activities prior to you leaving on July 28th?
yes, sir.
Were documents and materials seized from you by the FBI?
They were not seized, no. They were, I received a subpoena and I complied.
Okay, so you provided documents to the FBI,
Yes, sir.
but you retained copies for yourself?
My records are primarily digital, so I would presume I have copies of much of the material, maybe not all.
Okay, and then do you have a copy of the discovery or the subpoena response that you provided to the FBI? You keep a copy of that for yourself?
Don't believe so.
Okay, was that given to them on paper or electronically?
Electronically.
Okay, but you did not keep, as far as you know, that electronic file.
So
Okay. Do you keep in touch at all with Anna Lippincott?
we have maintained a friendship, yes.
You have, yeah, okay, so, okay, and where does Anna Lippincott live now?
She lives in the Netherlands.
Okay, do you maintain contact with, Jeff Longstreth?
So
Okay. Do you maintain contact with Tommy Rolfe?
yes, sir.
In what capacity?
He's a friend and we work together, so
And what do you now?
we work for the Ohio House.
Okay. Do you maintain contact with RJ Mancini?
Yes, sir.
Was he an employee or contractor of Constant Content or JPL Associates, to your knowledge?
I don't have an answer for that. I do not know.
Okay. And why do you keep in contact, or how do you keep in contact with RJ Mancini? Okay, so you all work in doing a similar job?
No, sir. We work on the official side, but in policy, I oversee policy and communications, sorry. And they work in policy.
Help me not understand where they work. You gotta set this, so I apologize if I zoned, but they work for who do
The
they?
Ohio House. So the caucus, they staff committees, so every, legislators chair committees in different clusters, you know, like issue areas. And they serve as policy advisors and, work with.
So how many people other than you and RJ and Tommy Rolfe are in that same function? Are there a lot of other people or?
To clarify the question that I'm answering outside of the three of us, so in addition to.
Yeah.
Eight, and between like the policy and comp shop.
Okay, and is there anything that distinguishes your role to those different roles? Like, are any of you in a more of a leadership position versus last staff position?
I oversee the two, I oversee